Chapter 961. A firework lit up the dimly lit underground field. A cloud of smoke and dust cut through the surface of the field and quickly extended to the giant peak ahead. Jun Mo was at the forefront of the smoke and dust. He rode the wind with the help of the chi of heaven and earth. The iron sword in front of him broke the wind silently like a real sword, moving forward at an unimaginable speed. The firework was a warning. The alarm in the giant peak rang loudly. Countless monks rushed out of the temple and came to the mountain road, ready to set up a great formation of Buddhism to suppress the invading enemy. Jun Mo, who had turned into a sword, was so fast that he was even faster than the light that shot toward the giant peak. He had already reached the foot of the mountain before the formation of Buddhism was completed. The autumn mountain was silent. The green bamboos on both sides of the mountain road suddenly swayed. The monks saw Jun Mo coming and saw the iron sword in his hand. The monks of Xiaofan temple took action, so Jun Mo naturally took out his sword. He came so fast that the formation of Buddhism on the mountain road between the peaks was not completed, but he just broke through it unreasonably. Until then, the autumn wind suddenly rose and whistled back and forth between the bamboo forest and the mountain road. There were dozens of blood stains on the green bamboos, which looked like red tear stains. No matter whether the blood stained the bamboos belonged to monks or Jun Mo, he had entered the depths of the giant peak and was rushing on his own path, his way of being a gentleman. Jun Mo's way of being a gentleman was to reason with the enemy first. If the enemy did not listen, then he would crush them. In the field at the foot of the mountain, he had already talked a lot with Xiaofan temple. Since the Xiaofan temple did not listen, he would not continue to talk and crush them directly. Qi Nian and the third elder of Commandment Yard were still rushing back from the field. The powerful people in the temples had no time to react. Jun Mo crushed them all the way. He held the iron sword in his hand and directly killed his way to the cliff plateau, covered in blood. The edge of the giant pit was full of steep cliffs. The cliffs cut a very deep hole in the wilderness, and then extended and finally converged in the distance. It was very shocking to see. The autumn wind had yet to rise in the wilderness. Not far away, there was a lonely Bodhi tree. Its green leaves were still round and motionless. However, there was a trail of smoke near the cliff. The so-called smoke and dust were actually countless dust particles and pebbles moving at an unimaginably high speed in the space next to the cliff. They looked like countless extremely thin threads. However long the cliff was, this streak of smoke was as long as the cliff. It stretched for thousands of li without a beginning or end in sight. It surrounded the world below the cliff like a miracle. It was unknown why it appeared. Amidst the smoke and dust, thousands of figures could be vaguely seen. In fact, it was not that they could be seen, but because those figures were moving too fast, even faster than what the naked eye could see. Those figures could overlap in countless places in an instant, creating this illusion. Among the thousands of figures, there were only two people. Two people who kept chasing each other. Suddenly, the melodious sound of a bell came from the distant giant peak. The thousands of miles of smoke and dust at the edge of the cliff suddenly stopped, and then slowly fell back to the plains. Where the smoke and dust settled, two people showed up. The scholar in a cotton-padded jacket had a cloth belt around his waist, and there was an inconspicuous wooden stick in it. He looked gentle and dusty, but extremely clean. He was the eldest brother of the academy. The middle-aged scholar opposite him had a flagon tied to his waist. He was the drunkard. Hundreds of white threads seeped out of the eldest brother's cotton-padded jacket and dragged for thousands of feet. They were gently fluttering in the autumn wind. It was very elegant, but inevitably looked a little weird. The pursuit in the distanceless state was too fast. The eldest brother's cotton-padded jacket was not ordinary. It did not tear in such a high-speed movement. However, the cotton in the interlayer of the jacket was squeezed out of the fine holes in the cotton cloth, and became the thinnest cotton thread. Hundreds of cotton threads were fluttering behind him. It was indeed a little hard to describe. Especially as the wind gradually changed, some of the cotton threads fell on his face, which looked even more funny, or even cute. The drunkard took down the flagon and drank endlessly. He was still relaxed after such a long pursuit in the distanceless state, but his hand holding the flagon was slightly trembling. The eldest brother looked at him drinking without saying a word. When he was a little tipsy, the drunkard put down the flagon and looked at him with mixed feelings. He said, "Li man, you have become faster, but you are still not as fast as me." The eldest brother smiled gently and said, "You did not catch up with me." The drunkard was silent for a moment, and then asked, "Why?" There were many whys in the world, at least more than 100,000 whys. What he wanted to ask was, of course, why the academy was against the Buddhism sect, because it meant that they were on the side of Haotian. In fact, I sometimes ask myself the same question. The eldest brother thought for a moment and then said, "I figured it out later." The youngest brother and Haotian were trapped in the chessboard, and they were in such a relationship. So if we want the youngest brother to come out, we have to save Haotian. We are not against the Buddhism sect, nor do we want to be friends with Haotian. We just want to save people. For the academy, saving people was always the most important thing, whether it was to save humans or to save the youngest brother. As for the pros and cons, they had to put aside for now. Once they started to consider the pros and cons, the academy would no longer be the academy. The drunkard frowned slightly and asked, "What is the academy trying to do?" The eldest brother said with a smile, "The master has his own ideas, and so do your disciples. What the academy is trying to do may seem ridiculous to you, but it should be interesting." The drunkard said, "The Buddha also has his own plan. He has waited for countless years until Haotian is weakened by the academy. When she and the mortals enter the knowing destiny state, it is probably the only and last hope for the academy to represent human beings. How can you destroy it?" The eldest brother shook his head and said, "The academy has never thought about representing human beings. We are just doing what we think is beneficial to human beings, and we do it ourselves first." The drunkard said, "Then why do you want to stop the Buddhism sect from killing Haotian?" The eldest brother said, "First of all, it is the same reason I told you before. We want to save people. Secondly, Haotian is in the divine kingdom, so Sang cannot be killed. Sang was Haotian, and Haotian was Sang. But Sang was in the human world, and Haotian was in the divine kingdom. If the two existences could not be wiped out at the same time, Haotian would never be killed." The eldest brother said again, "If so, the Buddhism sect can't kill Haotian by killing Sang. Instead, it will make her disappear and return to the divine kingdom. Haotian will become more powerful." It sounded hard to understand, but it was easy for people like the drunkard and the eldest brother to understand. That was why the academy had never figured out why the drunkard did it. The drunkard remained silent. The eldest brother understood and sighed, "Is that what the Abbey Dean is thinking?" The drunkard looked up at the grey sky and said, "Yes. Sang could be killed or awakened by the Buddha's ordeal. Either way, she could return to the divine kingdom of Haotian." That was what the Abbey Dean was thinking. Abbey Dean, the eldest brother realized that no words were suitable to describe the Abbey Dean. He said, "It seems that the chessboard could really kill her." The drunkard said, "She will definitely die." That was the Abbey Dean's judgment. Even though he was a disabled man now, both the drunkard and the eldest brother knew that his judgment was correct. The eldest brother looked at the mountain in the distance quietly and then pulled out the wooden stick from his waist. He didn't know how to fight before, so he never carried a weapon. Later on, he was forced to learn how to fight in the Pamir Mountains, so he broke the water ladle that he always carried with him. When he was chasing the Abbey Dean that year, he picked up a wooden stick on the beach of a small island in the South Sea. From that day on, the stick became his weapon. The stick was left by the headmaster in the human world. The eldest brother pulled out the stick, which meant that he was ready to fight. In other words, he was ready to risk his life. The Abbey Dean said that Sang Sang would definitely die in the Buddha's chessboard. Then Ning Ke, who was connected to her in life, would definitely die as well. As Ning Ke's senior brother, the eldest brother naturally had to risk his life. Everyone in the cultivation world knew that people in the academy were good at risking their lives. When they risked their lives, everyone would be afraid. Not only the famous crazy coup of the last generation, but also the current generation. When Jun Amo risked his life, the army couldn't move forward and the Yellow River flowed backward. When Yu Lian risked her life, she dared to fly up to the sky and cut off the rainbow. As for the most terrifying one, it was Mr. First of the Academy. The eldest brother was very gentle and rarely got angry, let alone risking his life. But the more gentle he was, the more terrifying he would be when he really risked his life. The Abbey Dean was the most powerful man in the human world when he was at his peak state. But even he couldn't do anything when facing the eldest brother who risked his life. The drunkard didn't want to stop him either. The drunkard turned sideways to avoid the stick. The eldest brother pointed at the giant peak and said, "Senior, aren't you worried that I'll leave like this?" The drunkard said calmly and confidently, "You're not as fast as me. I can catch up with you." The eldest brother said, "You've been chasing me for 3 months, but you still haven't caught up with me." The drunkard smiled and said, "As long as you don't enter the Xiankong temple, why should I catch up with you?" The eldest brother also smiled and said, "Senior, haven't you noticed that we've been standing opposite to each other? That's because I've been moving backward. If I turn around, can you still catch up with me?" The drunkard's expression suddenly changed. On the field by the cliff, the autumn wind suddenly whistled and a thunder-like sound was heard. A mass of airwaves spread to all directions and formed a huge hole. Hundreds of white cotton threads were falling in the wind. The eldest brother disappeared. The next moment, he appeared on the cliff plateau, under the pear tree. Almost at the same time, Jun Amo also came to the cliff plateau, covered in blood. Jun Amo looked at the eldest brother under the tree and nodded. The eldest brother and the junior brother hadn't seen each other for a long time. They didn't talk about the old days, but looked at the same place. On the broken temple in the cliff plateau, there was a white pagoda. In front of the white pagoda, an old monk sat cross-legged. In front of the old monk, there was a chessboard. "Yesterday I said I would write 3 chapters today, but I really can't do it anymore. Just 1 chapter. If I'm in a better state of mind tomorrow, I'll try to make up for it. Sorry. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation." Chapter 962. A spider web fell from the eaves of the white pagoda and covered the old monk's head and body. The old monk closed his eyes and looked calm. His silver eyebrows fluttered in the wind and touched the spider web in front of him, as if they were 2 pieces of silk in the web. If one didn't look carefully, they couldn't be distinguished at all. Although the old monk closed his eyes, it gave people a feeling that his eyes were still on the world and were fixed on the seemingly ordinary chessboard in front of him. The old monk was naturally the chief monk of scripture of Xiankong Temple. Since Ning Ke and Sang Sang entered the chessboard, he had never left the chessboard. He watched the spring leaves, summer flowers, autumn fruits, and winter snow in the mountains and listened to the morning bells and evening drums in the temple. Regardless of the wind and rain, he remained silent. Jun Amo came to the cliff and looked at the eldest brother under the pear tree. He walked directly to the old monk and raised the iron sword in his hand to chop at the chessboard. The wide and straight iron sword chopped heavily on the chessboard, making a deafening noise. Dust splashed on the cliff plateau. When the dust settled, the chessboard was still lying quietly in front of the old monk's knees. There was no trace left on the chessboard, not even a tremble. With Junmo's powerful cultivation state, the iron sword could probably cut off a stone mountain. Unexpectedly, it couldn't shake the chessboard at all. The chessboard could withstand the power of the iron sword, but the cliff plateau couldn't. With a clear cracking sound, several cracks appeared on the cliff plateau. The cracks were dark and deep, probably hundreds of feet deep into the mountain. These cracks spread to the edge of the cliff and finally broke the cliff wall under the pear tree. Years ago, the splashing water on the chessboard turned into several large waterfalls. Although the water had no source, it kept flowing down the cliff. Until now, it was finally cut off by Junmo's sword. One sword could break the waterfall, but not the chessboard. Junmo looked at the chief monk behind the chessboard and raised the iron sword in his hand again. The chief monk still closed his eyes, as if he didn't know the existence of the iron sword. His hands fell on the chessboard. Was the Vajra of the chessboard his trick? Junmo couldn't be sure, and he didn't need to be sure. He raised the iron sword and chopped down again. But this time, it was not the chessboard, but the chief monk. Before the sword fell, the wind came first. The iron sword easily tore the seemingly troublesome cobwebs and fell on the chief monk's head, among the solemn precept scars. The iron sword was thick, and the chief monk's head was round. Therefore, Junmo didn't look like chopping with the sword, but more like hitting with a stick. Another loud crash sounded. The cold wind blew on the cliff plateau, and the pear tree swayed. The pear tree shook. The pear tree shook. The pear tree shook. The pear tree shook. The chief monk closed his eyes and still looked calm. But his silver eyebrows fluttered a little crazily, like a cassia on a drying line in the wind. It was hard to guess where the sleeves and the hem of the clothes would flutter. The iron sword didn't leave any mark on his head, let alone a wound. He didn't bleed either. The chief monk's body had become Buddha, and his body and mind were both indestructible. To him, Ning Kei's primordial 13 arrows were like straws, and Junmo's iron sword was just a wooden stick. However, he suddenly became shorter. The reason why he became shorter was that his body had sunk into the surface of the cliff platform. He was still sitting cross-legged and had sunk only a few inches, but the iron sword had still sunk a little. Junmo still didn't speak. He raised the iron sword in his hand and prepared to chop down again. At this moment, the wind on the cliff became slightly turbulent. Eldest brother came to his side. This was what it meant to stand shoulder to shoulder. Junmo withdrew his iron sword because his eldest brother was holding a wooden stick in his hand. The eldest brother walked to the chief monk with the wooden stick in his hand and knocked on him. His movement was a bit slow, and the stick seemed to knock very lightly. However, when the wooden stick fell on the chief monk's head, a sound that was even more horrible than the sound made by Junmo's iron sword was heard. With a boom, countless cracks appeared on the white pagoda behind the chief monk, which looked like the previous spider web. The copper bell hanging on the eaves rang crisply and then exploded into pieces. The chief monk still had his eyes closed. His silver eyebrows fluttered in the wind, and his face became slightly pale. His body sunk half a foot deep into the cliff platform. Although he had sunk, the chief monk was not really hurt. The chessboard under his hand sunk deeper into the cliff platform and became more solid. The eldest brother sighed, "It still can't be broken." Junmo raised the iron sword and said, "Just keep smashing it." At this moment, a breeze rose on the cliff platform, and the fragrance of wine overflowed. The drunkard came to the platform and looked at the eldest brother in silence. Junmo looked back at him and said, "Do you want to stop us?" The drunkard said, "I don't want to risk my life." The academy's second-year students were present at the same time. Even he had to risk his life. However, the eldest brother felt a bit confused and asked, "Aren't you worried that we will take the chessboard away?" The drunkard said, "The chief monk is as strong as Vajrabhati. Even I and the butcher can't break it. Neither can you. So why should I worry?" Junmo didn't say anything more. He turned around and waved the iron sword to chop the chief monk's head again. There was another loud bang. The cracks on the white pagoda became deeper, and so did the cracks on the cliff platform. Many cracks also appeared on the stone walls in the cliff cave. The whole world seemed to be falling apart. But the chief monk was still the same. "Senior brother, it's your turn." Junmo stepped back and gave the position to the eldest brother. Looking at the chessboard that had sunk completely into the cliff platform, the eldest brother thought for a while and said, "I won't smash it." The drunkard smiled. Junmo frowned slightly. The eldest brother looked at him and said with a smile, "You try to pry it open." Junmo suddenly remembered something that happened many years ago in the back mountain of the academy. At that time, he and the eldest brother had just entered the academy and were still very young. They were ordered by the headmaster of academy to repair the mountain path in the back mountain. They encountered a rock that had fallen from the cliff, which was very troublesome. When Junmo was young, he was prouder, more confident and more stubborn than he was now. He held a mountain-splitting axe and kept smashing the big rock for 3 days and 3 nights. In the end, his perlicue was bleeding, and his body was so exhausted that he could barely lift his mountain-splitting axe. However, only a small part of the rock had been smashed away. When he was smashing the rock, the eldest brother did nothing but watched. He knew that the eldest brother was a little weak, but he was still a little angry because of his helplessness. No matter how angry he was, Junmo wouldn't blame the eldest brother, let alone speak ill of him. So he felt very wronged. He didn't know why, but he just cried. The eldest brother looked at the huge rock for a long time. When he found that little Junmo was crying, he looked at him for a long time. Then he left without saying anything. The eldest brother left so heartlessly. Of course, Junmo wouldn't cry anymore. Who was he crying for? He washed his face with the cold stream water and recovered some energy. He picked up the axe again and was ready to continue smashing. At this time, the eldest brother came back with a dozen of tough big bamboo in his arms. His forehead was covered with sweat. It was very hard for him to drag these bamboos down. The eldest brother stuffed the bamboo into the gap between the rock and the cliff. He calculated and confirmed that it was accurate. Then he called Junmo to him and said, "Pry it." Junmo had always listened to the eldest brother. Although he didn't understand what the eldest brother wanted to do and what the bamboo was for, he still did as he was told. The huge rock was smashed by the mountain-splitting axe for 3 days and 3 nights without being smashed. Then when Junmo went to pry it, he found that the rock soon loosened and then rolled down the mountain path, becoming a scenery in the mountain stream. Many years had passed, but Junmo still listened to the eldest brother. Since the eldest brother asked him to pry it, he would do it. He walked to the front of the chief monk and stabbed the iron sword into it. The iron sword was not between the chief monk's body and the cliff plateau, but was stabbed into the edge of the chessboard. The drunkard's expression changed slightly. Junmo waved the iron sword to pry it out. The chi of heaven and earth on the cliff plateau was in chaos. The wind was howling. The stones on the surface of the white pagoda were peeled off and hit the chief monk's head, splashing smoke and dust. The chief monk was still standing there. The chessboard was still in the cliff plateau. The iron sword was bearing an unimaginable weight. It was like a real mountain. Junmo was going to pry the mountain up. A clear whistle burst out from his lips. It was as bright as a phoenix and as powerful as a landslide. The flagon on the drunkard's waist floated up slightly. The eldest brother stood in front of him with his back to him. In the clear whistle, the iron sword in Junmo's hand slightly bent and then straightened. His sword was always straight. Even a mountain couldn't bend it. There was an unimaginable power between the bending. The chessboard was finally pried up and slowly rose to the ground. The chief monk's silver eyebrows fluttered. He suddenly turned over his hands and pressed them on the chessboard. The mountain fell on the chessboard again. Jun Mo's clear whistle stopped abruptly. He shouted like thunder, "Up!" The cliff wall collapsed, the pear tree shook, and the green leaves fell like rain. The chessboard was up. The chief monk's hand was on the chessboard. He was still sitting cross-legged. The iron sword was strong and straight. However, the chessboard and the chief monk were as heavy as the Prajna mountain. Even if the chessboard was lifted, it could only make a small gap. The gap was thinner than a hair. Even the smallest ant couldn't climb in. But it was enough. The gap meant that the chessboard and the mountain had been separated. The chessboard and the mountain were separated, but not from the chief monk's hand. Then, it was the eldest brother's business. He didn't know when his hand had fallen on the shoulder of the chief monk. On the cliff plateau, the airflow burst out, making a buzzing sound like a bell or a chime. In front of the white pagoda, only Jun Mo was standing with the iron sword. The eldest brother, the chief monk, and the chessboard had all disappeared. Where did they go? They went to the sky. Although the giant mountain was majestic and tall and could be called the first peak in the world, it was deep underground. Therefore, if seen from the surface, the peak was only a little higher than the wilderness. The sky was much higher than the peak. There were white clouds floating in the blue sky. Two people appeared in the white clouds. The eldest brother let go of his hand. The chief monk broke through the clouds and fell to the ground. The first update. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 963. On the cliff plateau, the drunkard looked up at the sky with a solemn expression. He had already been shocked when Yifutian had gotten rid of him in the wilderness. Now that he saw this scene, he was even more shocked. The realm that Yifutian had displayed had far surpassed the level he had displayed during the battle in Chang'an. It had even exceeded his imagination. Li Man, do you really want to be the fastest one? The flagon trembled in the autumn wind and the aroma spread. The drunkard's figure suddenly turned illusory and was about to break the space and go to the ninth heaven to help the chief monk. He didn't make a move just now because he believed that Li Man and Jun Mo couldn't do anything to the chief monk because of his Vajra body. But the fact overturned his speculation. Jun Mo used the iron sword to pry the chief monk and the chessboard off the cliff plateau. Li Man took the chief monk and the chessboard to the sky. Many people fell from the cliff, but few fell from the sky. A few years ago in Chang'an City, there were 3 people who fought from the ground to the sky and then fell from the sky. The final result was that Yu Lian, the most powerful person in the Devil's Doctrine, was also seriously injured. What about the chief monk? The chief monk was falling from the clouds to the ground with the chessboard in his arms. His body had become Buddha and was as solid as the earth. What would happen if he met the real earth? The drunkard was not as confident as before. He couldn't watch the chief monk get hurt. Most importantly, he couldn't watch the academy take the chessboard away. So he was ready to make a move. Right at this moment, an iron sword pierced through the air and slashed at his face. Jun Mo drew his sword. He knew that the drunkard was very powerful, so he used his right hand. The iron sword was rolled up by his right sleeve and chopped at the drunkard. Although his hand was not there, the sword and the intent were still there. The drunkard didn't know that Jun Mo had recovered so much after a year of fighting in the underground wilderness. He slightly raised his eyebrows and his palms appeared in front of him without any movement. His state was much higher than Jun Mo's, but he was cautious and used the immeasurable Buddhism. The wine was immeasurable, the longevity was immeasurable, the intent was immeasurable, and the power of Buddha was immeasurable. The drunkard's palms were like two mountains closing together and clamped Jun Mo's iron sword. Jun Mo's iron sword felt as if it was being crushed by a mountain. He couldn't move it, nor could he pull it out. In fact, he had never thought of withdrawing his sword. He knew that he was still far from the drunkard, but he did not care because he was not fighting alone today. The autumn wind blew on the plateau again. The cotton-padded jacket with dozens of thin white lines appeared under the pear tree. In a flash, eldest brother returned to the field from the high sky. Without hesitation, he raised the wooden stick in his hand and smashed it at the drunkard. He did not hit the drunkard's face or body. Although he had learned how to fight and the wooden stick was not an ordinary weapon, his style was not tough enough. As long as the drunkard was not absolutely tough, the unfathomable state of the drunkard would have enough time to use the correct method to deal with the wooden stick in his hand. So he smashed the iron sword with his wooden stick. The iron sword in Jun Mo's hand, the wooden stick fell on the iron sword without a sound. It was like forging iron. Jun Mo's iron sword was an iron hammer. When it was suppressed by the drunkard, it also pressed the drunkard, who was a hard iron block, down. Then the wooden stick became the second iron hammer and fell. There was a dead silence on the plateau, and then a loud noise suddenly burst out. The autumn wind blew. The drunkard's mouth was bleeding, his hair was disheveled, and his face was pale. His hands and body were trembling, and he could no longer suppress the iron sword. He let out a strange howl and turned around to leave. His voice was old and unpleasant, like rusty bronzes rubbing against each other. His howl was even more unpleasant to the ears. It sounded like a rusty bronze that had been smashed flat. It sounded so miserable. The autumn wind blew on the plateau again and the airflow dispersed. The drunkard disappeared without a trace. Jun Mo rolled up his right sleeve and the iron sword flew back to his left hand. Eldest brother did not chase after the drunkard. He reached out his hand and grabbed Jun Mo's empty sleeve. The two also disappeared on the plateau. The battle on the plateau was very dangerous. It was hard to describe it in words. But it happened in a very short time. From the drunkard's rising, to Jun Mo's sword attack, to the eldest brother's return and the drunkard's escape, it was only a moment. When the battle on the plateau happened, the chief monk was still falling from the sky. Countless layers of clouds were broken. The silver eyebrows of the chief monk were blown to the sky by the wind, shaking and swaying like a military flag in the strong wind. But he still closed his eyes and looked calm. The Buddha's chessboard was held in his arms. The light in the underground field was dim, and the meadow was blown down by the wind. The eldest brother and Jun Mo appeared. A shrill howl came from the sky, as if a heavy object was falling at a high speed. They did not look at the sky, but at the field in front of them. The air seemed to be torn apart, and the temperature in the field suddenly rose. The heavy object finally fell on the ground and smashed into the meadow. The earth kept shaking, and countless black soil was lifted up. There was a huge pit in the field. It was thousands of feet wide and dozens of feet deep. The rocks at the bottom of the pit were all shattered and covered in the pit. It looked like a miniature sinkhole. The chief monk sat cross-legged at the bottom of the pit. His kasaya had long been broken into pieces, and his naked thin body was covered with mud and stone chips. He looked very embarrassed, but he still did not open his eyes, and there was no blood on his body. The Buddha's chessboard was still in his arms. The eldest brother and Jun Mo were at the edge of the pit. Jun Mo jumped into the pit indifferently. He rolled up the sword in his right sleeve and chopped at the chief monk's head again. The chief monk lowered his head and did not dodge. The iron sword fell, followed by the wooden stick. The gravel at the bottom of the pit was shaken up and floated in the air. The chief monk's face became paler. The mud and stone chips on his head were shaken up by the iron sword and became brighter. But there was still no blood. The wind blew at the bottom of the pit, and the gravel hanging in the air fell down. The drunkard appeared behind the two. The eldest brother turned around and came to the front of the drunkard. The drunkard raised his eyebrows and slapped with his palm. A shadow suddenly appeared at the bottom of the pit, as if something was covering the sky. The eldest brother raised his stick to the sky and stabbed at the palm that covered the sky. The palm didn't fall, and the stick didn't break. The eldest brother turned pale and quickly retreated. He retreated to the side of the chief monk and put his hand on the chief monk's shoulder again. Junmo's iron sword had pierced between the chief monk and the gravel at the bottom of the pit. With a long howl, countless blood splashed out from Junmo's body and hit on the cliff at the bottom of the pit. The body of the chief monk, which was as heavy as a mountain, was forcibly lifted up again. It was still only a little bit, but it was enough. The eldest brother and the chief monk disappeared again. The next moment, they came to the sky above the east peak. There were countless rugged rocks on the east peak, which were made by the hard cultivation of countless eminent monks of the Xiankong temple. They were harder than steel, and sharper than swords. The eldest brother wanted to know if the chief monk would bleed if he was smashed on these rocks. But the drunkard had already arrived. He didn't care about Junmo's iron sword. He flew to the sky with the distanceless state on the ground at the risk of injury, and came to the front of the eldest brother. The drunkard firmly believed that as long as he was willing to pay the price, there was no reason for him to be slower than the eldest brother. He had cultivated for tens of thousands of years, how could he be slower than a person who had only cultivated for dozens of years? The distanceless state couldn't really fly freely in the sky. It could only let him go from the ground to somewhere in the sky, or back to the ground, and he could only stay in the sky for a short time. The eldest brother carried the heavy chief monk to the sky, which was already very hard, and was falling to the east peak. He should let go of the chief monk, but it was meaningless for him to let go with the drunkard by his side. What else could he do if he didn't let go? In the cold wind, the eldest brother looked at the drunkard and suddenly smiled. The smile was not decisive, but it was a decisive invitation. He took the chief monk and flew to the cliff at the edge of the giant pit. He didn't really fly. He wanted to take the chief monk to the depth of the cliff. The depth of the cliff was the underground of the wilderness. The distanceless state relied on the turbulent layer of the chi of heaven and earth to move at a high speed. It reduced the distance between two places to a very short distance. There were turbulent layers in the tangible things. But since ancient times, the grand cultivators who could reach the distanceless state would never try to go through those passages. Because it was very dangerous, and it meant that you might have to face countless cliffs in an instant. Those cliffs were not real cliffs, but the chi of heaven and earth between the cliffs. Would the drunkard dare to follow if the eldest brother did that? From the depth of the cliff at the east of the giant pit came a dull rumbling sound. On the field below the cliff, the farmers who were grazing, and the nobles who were planning how to suppress the rebellious serfs all heard the sound. Countless people walked out of their tents and looked at the cliff in the distance. Their eyes were full of confusion. The rumbling sound became louder and louder, getting closer and closer to the surface of the cliff. All of a sudden, countless stones shot out from somewhere on the cliff and fell into the field and the lake below. The water splashed, the mud flew, and the cattle and sheep screamed uneasily. As the smoke and dust settled, a deep cave appeared on the cliff. The hole was very deep and went straight into the cliff for miles. Junmo stood at the bottom of the pit in the field and looked at the hole on the cliff in the distance. He frowned slightly and was a little worried. The drunkard landed beside him and said while looking at him, "Li Man is dead." A cough came from the bottom of the pit. The eldest brother appeared beside Junmo and looked at the drunkard. "I'm lucky. I'm not dead. There were many cuts on his cotton-padded jacket, and blood was seeping out. The drunkard looked at him with a confused expression and said, "How could you not die in such a way?" The eldest brother said, "The chief monk is in front. He can cut mountains and cut stones." After saying that, he pulled up Junmo's empty sleeve and disappeared on the spot. The next moment, the drunkard appeared above the cliff. He lowered his head and looked at the deep hole. His face turned pale because the hole had been blocked by stones. The marks were made by the iron sword. At the end of the cliff cave, which was more than 10 miles deep, there was no light at all. It was as dark as the eternal night. The eldest brother and Junmo stood in front of the chief monk. The chief monk still lowered his head and said nothing. Junmo did not say anything either. He walked to the front of the chief monk and raised the iron sword, ready to chop down. The eldest brother suddenly said, "Pry again." Junmo did not ask because he understood. He directly stabbed the iron sword under the chief monk's body. The chief monk looked very miserable. He was covered with stone chips and there were some faint sounds coming from his body. He hit the ground continuously and fell more than 10 miles deep into the wilderness. Even though he was an invincible Vajra, it was still hard for him to hold on. But he did not open his eyes or say anything. His expression was still calm. Until then, he finally reacted. He still did not open his eyes, but his lips were slightly trembling as if he was about to say something. It was strange. It was not the first time that Junmo tried to pry him off the ground. He had been indifferent before. Why did he suddenly react? Junmo did not pay attention to him. He poured all his domineering state into the iron sword. The chief monk moved his lips and said with an old and hoarse voice, "As I have heard," he was vigilant because he had guessed what the two from the academy were going to do. What the eldest brother and Junmo were going to do was definitely not to throw him down in the air like before. At this moment, the drunkard could not enter the cliff cave for the time being. The eldest brother and Junmo had more time, so they could try another method. Making him leave the ground was the premise of this method. So he had to move. He moved his lips and said the Buddha's words. He used the supreme Dharma access of words to obey. But how could the eldest brother not know what he would do? When the 4 words of, "as I have heard," were just sounded in the dark cliff cave, another sentence followed. Confucius said, as Confucius said, it was the Buddha's words. The cliff cave was in silence. Junmo screamed. His body was covered with sweat and blood. He looked like a bloody man. His iron sword finally pried the chief monk off the ground once again. The eldest brother stretched out his hands and held the chief monk's shoulders, as if to ensure his balance. He did nothing. In fact, he had taken the chief monk far away in a flash. They walked in the cliff cave, within an inch. The eldest brother took the chief monk and went back and forth within an inch. Anyway, he did not want the chief monk to touch the ground. The eldest brother's cotton-padded jacket was bleeding again. Such intensive distanceless state had caused great damage to him. The chief monk was as solid as the earth. If he was separated from the ground, he would be weak. His face was slightly pale. Junmo's iron sword had fallen on the chief monk's head. There was a clear sound, like metal and stone colliding. A drop of red blood flowed out of the chief monk's head. The most powerful Vajra body of the Buddhism sect was finally broken by the eldest brother and Junmo. However, it was just a drop of blood. The eldest brother and Junmo had paid such a high price to make the chief monk bleed a drop of blood. If it was seen by others, it was not worth it, and they might even feel desperate. If they kept hacking like this, how many times would they need to hack the chief monk until he was seriously injured? How many years would they need to hack him? But people in the academy would never think so. Junmo held the iron sword and hacked the chief monk's head again and again, as if he would never feel tired. The eldest brother held the chief monk's shoulders and looked calm, as if he would never feel tired. So what if his body became Buddha? As long as he started to bleed, it meant that he would continue to bleed. No matter how many years it would take, as long as he kept hacking, he would be hacked to death. That was what Junmo thought. Eldest senior brother thought so too. And when the two of them wanted to do the same thing, there were very few times when that thing could not be done. We have two computers. My wife can enter the authors section, but I can't. It's a problem of my character. This is the second chapter, 4,000 words. There are 2 more chapters. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for me and vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 964. Many years ago, in the autumn rain at the Lang Temple, Yisu, the world wayfarer of Haotian Taoism, Qi Nian, the world wayfarer of Buddhism, and the most powerful sword in the human world could do nothing to them. They could only watch the Buddha statue collapse. Today, outside the Xiankong Temple in the West Wilderness, they could beat the chief monk of scripture, the Buddha in the human world, in front of the drunkard, such a powerful cultivator, and even broke the chief monk's Vajra body. Because they were very strong, and because they cooperated perfectly. Because they had a natural tacit understanding, which represented absolute trust and confidence. Only the academy could cultivate such temperament, and only the headmaster of academy could teach such disciples. When they fought side by side, even heaven would feel afraid, not to mention the enemy. After Junmo had chopped the iron sword for the umpteenth time, the chief monk of scripture finally opened his eyes. A thin stream of blood flowed from the top of his head into his eyes, and his sight was bloody. The chief monk felt very painful, really painful. He also found that the 2 disciples of the academy were really going to keep chopping forever. He didn't want to die yet, because he hadn't seen Buddha reappear in the human world. So he had to do something, although he knew the consequences. The iron sword fell again. The chief monk loosened his hand holding the chessboard, and put one hand in front of him. He raised it a little high, just in front of the iron sword. The chief monk's hand didn't hold the iron sword. Because the moment he let go, the eldest brother also let go of the iron sword. He held the wooden stick and smashed it heavily on the chief monk's mouth between his thumb and index finger. The wooden stick didn't want to snatch food from the tiger's mouth, but to feed the tiger with its own body. The chief monk suddenly felt suffocated. His hand, wrist, and chest trembled uneasily. His Vajra body made a cracking sound, as if it would break in the next moment. He had only wanted to stretch out one hand, because he could stop Junmo's iron sword with one hand. Unexpectedly, it was the wooden stick that came to him. He could not understand. Could the 2 from the academy see through the minds of humans? The eldest brother and Junmo couldn't see through others' thoughts, but they could know each other's thoughts without talking. So the iron sword didn't fall, but the wooden stick came. Junmo's iron sword fell down and chopped at the chessboard in the arms of the chief monk. No matter how chaotic the chief monk's Zen heart was, he couldn't stop the wooden stick. There was a clear ringing sound, as if a tiny porcelain cup had fallen to the ground. Suddenly, an extremely bright light appeared in the dark cave. It was the light of heaven. An extremely deep crack extended from the depths of the plains to the ground. Then, the earth shook, and the cliff collapsed. Countless rocks and dirt flew out. On the east side of the sinkhole, a gap of more than 10 miles long appeared. The scene was extremely shocking. In the opening of the sinkhole, there were innumerable ant nests, rat holes, roots of autumn grass, and stolen fruits. There was a thin stream of water between the rocks, gradually wetting the rocks. The chief monk sat among the rubble. His face was covered with dust and blood. He looked very miserable. The chessboard in his arms had already been taken away by Junmo's iron sword. The drunkard stood at the edge of the collapsed cliff and looked at the scene. His expression suddenly changed. Junmo had returned to the state before the verdant canyon, and Li Manman's state had improved rapidly. This made him extremely shocked and vigilant. However, he still didn't expect that these two could actually break the Vajra body of the chief monk and take away the chessboard. The chief monk looked at the eldest brother and Junmo with a sad expression, but also a sense of loss and relief. His voice was as low as a bell, and he said with pity, "It's useless." "What's useless?" "Even if you get the chessboard, it's useless. You can't open the chessboard and save Haotian and Ning Ke from inside. Because it's a celestial instrument left by Buddha. If it didn't rot in the Lank Temple, it would never rot. It had already surpassed the rules of time and was truly Vajra body." The eldest brother glanced at the chessboard in Junmo's hand and said nothing. He reached out and grabbed Junmo's sleeve. The two disappeared and returned to the green tree by the cliff plateau. The next moment, the autumn wind blew again. The drunkard also returned to the cliff plateau with the chief monk of scripture. The chief monk sat in front of the white pagoda and looked at the two under the tree. He said with pity, "It's really useless." Junmo ignored him. He picked up the iron sword and chopped at the chessboard. The eldest brother stood in front of the chessboard with a pale face. It was obvious that his psyche power had been greatly consumed. But he just stood there. Neither the drunkard or the chief monk wanted to try. The sound of the iron sword falling on the chessboard kept ringing on the cliff plateau. It was clear and decisive, and it was completely different from the bell in the temple. There were countless soldiers and horses in the midst of it. Junmo waved the iron sword and kept chopping. No one knew how many times he had chopped and how much time had passed. The sound echoed among the cliffs, as if the army was vowing to attack the city. The Buddha city was hard to break. Junmo kept chopping until his fingers were bleeding. His expression didn't change. Every time he waved the sword, he was still so meticulous to make sure that he could exert the greatest power. The chief monk looked at the scene in silence and did nothing. So the drunkard did nothing either. He just watched quietly, and the more he watched, the more complicated his mood became. He should have known that there was no hope, but he still kept doing it. It even gave the onlookers the illusion that the iron sword could chop out hope from despair. What kind of mind did he have? How could the headmaster of the academy teach such a disciple? Where did he find such a disciple? Junmo suddenly stopped, not because he was tired, although he was really tired, but because one side of the iron sword had been deformed. The edgeless sword blade had become flat. The iron sword was indestructible. Before the verdant canyon, it had chopped countless swords. Even Lu Bai's sword had been broken by the iron sword. But today it was deformed in front of the chessboard. He looked at the chief monk of scripture and asked, "If it's really useless, why did you watch the chessboard on the cliff plateau for a whole year? You didn't dare to leave it no matter what happened." The chief monk said, "I watched it for a year because I wanted to watch it." The two "watch" in the beginning and the end of the sentence could have different pronunciations and meanings. The first "watch" was to guard, and the second "watch" was to see, or to watch. The eldest brother asked, "What do you want to watch?" The chief monk's silver eyebrows fluttered in the autumn wind. He said, "To watch Buddha and all living beings." Junmo didn't understand. He shook his head, changed the side of the iron sword in his hand, and continued to chop the chessboard. The chief monk's expression changed slightly, and the drunkard's expression became more and more serious. They didn't expect that Junmo stopped not because he gave up, but because he wanted to change the side of the iron sword in his hand. So even if the iron sword was really broken, he would change another side and continue to chop. The eldest brother suddenly said, "Buddha's chessboard can't be cut, and Haotian can't be killed. The drunkard looked at him and wanted to stop him from continuing. But he thought for a while and didn't move. The eldest brother continued, even if Buddha destroyed her existence in the chessboard, he could only turn her back into a pure rule and naturally return to the divine kingdom. What's the point of doing that? The chief monk put his palms together and said, Buddha could foresee the past 5,000 years, and the future 5,000 years. He could foresee the past when he was alive, and the future when he was dead. Naturally, he could foresee what happened today. The eldest brother said calmly, the headmaster thought for 1,000 years and finally came up with a way to keep her in the human world. Could Buddha foresee the headmaster's means? Could Buddha foresee the youngest brother's ability? Or could Buddha foresee that Haotian was divided into two by the academy? No, Buddha couldn't foresee anything. His tone was normal, and his expression was calm, but he was confident. Even Haotian couldn't foresee what the academy did, let alone Buddha. The chief monk understood, so he kept silent for a long time. The drunkard had heard the Abbey Dean talk about it in the stone room of the divine halls of West Hill. So he knew it long ago, and that was why he came here to help the Buddhism sect. Buddha set a game of life and death for Haotian, but he couldn't foresee that Haotian had become two. In the eldest brother's words, what was the point of the game? Pointless. In a very short time, the chief monk became much older, because he knew the intention of Taoism, and admitted that the academy was right, and Buddha's game was pointless. If there was only one Haotian, then Buddha's chessboard could only kill Sang Sang, and then suppress her forever, so that she couldn't return to the divine kingdom and be resurrected. But now there were two Haotian. Even if Buddha could kill Sang Sang, how could he prevent the rules she turned into after her death from connecting with the world? Haotian was still there, and rules were naturally connected, and nothing could stop it. After death, Sang Sang would definitely return to the divine kingdom, which was the ending the Abbey Dean wanted. Pointless. The chief monk looked at Jun Mo, who was still cutting the chessboard, and repeated the 4 words again. What you are doing is also pointless. This is Buddha's chessboard. As long as Buddha doesn't allow them to return, they will never be able to. As for whether Haotian in the chessboard is alive or dead, and whether she will return to the divine kingdom after her death, it depends on the fate of Buddha, or the will of heaven. Before that, mortals like us are pointless. The bell between the peaks was still ringing. Many monks came to the cliff plateau, but they didn't dare to go forward. Hearing this, they all bowed with their palms pressed together. Qi Nian and the third elder of Commandment Yard also came. In this battle between the academy and Xiankong Temple, it seemed that the academy had the upper hand. But as long as the academy couldn't open the chessboard, it was destined to lose. Jun Mo finally stopped and suddenly said, "If we can't open it, then we will go in." The eldest brother smiled and said, "That makes sense." The chief monk said, "Not everyone can enter it." The eldest brother said, "Chief monk, have you ever wondered why we didn't leave, but came to the cliff plateau, since we have the chessboard?" The chief monk's silver eyebrows slightly fluttered, as if he had noticed something. The eldest brother looked at the green tree and reached out to touch the leaves. He said, "Is this the pear tree?" The chief monk was silent. Qi Nian and the other monks behind the green vine slightly changed their expressions. The eldest brother said, "I heard that this pear tree blooms every 500 years, bears fruit every 5 days, and falls to the ground every 5 minutes. It touches the ground and drifts with the current, never to be seen again. It's really amazing." The drunkard said, "This tree blooms and bears fruit a year ago." The eldest brother sat down against the green tree and said, "If so, then I will wait for another 499 years. When it blooms and bears fruit, I will go into the chessboard to find it." Jun Mo picked up the chessboard and sat down under the tree. Chapter 3, and then go to have a meal. Chapter 4 will be later. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 965. Even if he had to wait for another 500 years, he would continue to wait. Listening to the morning bell and evening drum, watching the spring breeze and autumn rain, silently waiting for time to pass. There would definitely be a time when the pear blossom tree would bloom like snow. What kind of perseverance was this? What kind of spirit was this? Looking at the two under the pear tree, the chief monk remained silent for a long time. He did not expect that the academy would even know the biggest secret of the Buddhism sect. That seemingly ordinary scholar was indeed as the rumors said. He was well-read and knowledgeable. No matter what field he was in, he could be the best. The drunkard walked to the other side of the cliff, untied the flagon, and began to drink. He looked at the distant sky silently. What he needed to do was to help Haotian Taoism send Haotian back to the divine kingdom. It would take at least 500 years for the chessboard to open, but he was not worried at all. What he was best at was fighting against time. The chief monk said, 500 years is a long time, enough for a lot of things to happen in the human world. Taoism won't miss this opportunity if you wait under the pear tree. But what about the academy? What about the Tang Empire? No wonder he was the chief preaching monk of the Xiankong Temple and the Buddha on earth of this generation. His simple words made everyone silent. Eldest brother and Jun Mo would wait under the pear tree for 500 years. Who would guard Chang'an? This green tree was planted by Buddha himself countless years ago. It was a slender sapling back then, but now it's difficult to encircle it with 2 palms. When you come again 500 years later, perhaps the green tree will have reached the sky. What the chief monk said was rather sentimental, but it was also a suggestion. Jun Mo said, if the pear tree is not in front of us, the academy will not be at ease. The chief monk said, this pear tree is a sacred object left by Buddha. We must take good care of it. Jun Mo said, youngest brother is in the chessboard, so the academy has to be careful. Moreover, you bald donkeys are the most shameless, fickle, hypocritical, and fanatical. I'm afraid that you will destroy the tree as soon as we leave. The Xiankong Temple monks behind the green vines had ugly expressions when they heard this. The chief monk said calmly, what is the academy going to do? There are more than 10,000 monks in the temple, all of them have firm Zen hearts. If they really want to seize it, do you think you can defend it for 500 years? Jun Mo ignored him and looked at eldest senior brother, asking, senior brother, is it possible? Eldest brother thought about it and said, that's feasible. Jun Mo didn't say anything specific, but he knew what Jun Mo was asking. So he slowly stood up, holding the wooden stick, and stood in front of the pear tree. Jun Mo stood up and adjusted his qi circulation for a moment. Then, he stabbed the iron sword into the cliff plateau until the hilt slid down. The cliff was firm, and the iron sword went in silently. The drunkard had guessed what the two from the academy were going to do. He raised his eyebrows in disbelief. Eldest senior brother was very gentle and kind. He to him to say. To senior eldest, Zhou, and years later, he said, he, too. Eldest senior brother's temperament was very gentle and kind. He did everything slowly and spoke softly. He was the most amiable person and rarely got angry. He had never threatened anyone before, so his threats were very powerful. It was just like how he rarely risked his life against others, so when he risked his life, everyone would be afraid. The drunkard frowned. What he wanted was true immortality. But it was not worth it to drive the academy mad and kill him at all costs just for immortality. Before today, he did not believe that the academy could kill him. But now he realized that it was not entirely impossible. Of course, even if the academy could kill him, they would have to bury the academy with them, or even the entire Tang Empire. Logically speaking, such a situation should not happen. But what if the academy really went crazy? What if these people really wanted to kill him? The drunkard said, Taoism invited me to the West Wilderness and asked me to pass on a message. I brought it here a year ago. I also tried to leave the chessboard in the Xiankong temple. Since I failed, I will not do it again. Eldest senior brother said, Thank you very much. He knew that the drunkard said so because he had confirmed that the chessboard left by Buddha could not be opened by external force. But he did not want to say it out. The drunkard could guess what the academy wanted to do because he knew the headmaster of the academy and Kuharan. He knew that the academy looked elegant and peaceful, but it was actually a group of lunatics. The monks of the Xiankong temple did not know the academy well, so they could not guess what the academy was going to do. They looked at the eldest senior brother who was standing in front of the pear tree and became nervous. The chief monk looked at Jun Mo and the sword in his hand. His expression suddenly changed. Jun Mo did not look at him. He held the sword hilt and shouted. The iron sword began to move on the cliff plateau. The movement of the iron sword was to cut. A horrible sound of friction was heard. Pebbles flew and dust rose. The iron sword moved around the pear tree and on the surface of the cliff plateau. Finally, it broke out of the cliff. A crack appeared on the ground of the cliff plateau. The eldest senior brother bent down and put his hand into the crack. Jun Mo asked again, Senior brother, is it possible? The eldest senior brother said, It's a bit hard, but it's doable. What about you? I can't leave yet. Jun Mo held the iron sword and looked at the dark and cold underground field under the peak. He said, There are many people who need me there. The eldest senior brother praised, Younger brother, you are kind and brave. Jun Mo said, I just want peace of mind. Eldest brother said, Kindness is the only thing that can make one feel at ease. Courage is the only thing that can move forward. Being praised by the eldest senior brother, Jun Mo was still calm because he believed that he was worthy of the two words. He said, I will send you off. The eldest senior brother said, I will send you off. After saying this, his hand shook slightly. The crack on the cliff plateau suddenly widened. The sound of friction was loud. A large cliff plateau slowly left the mountain. The pear tree was on the cliff plateau. The mud and sand fell. Under the cliff plateau, the roots of the pear tree could be vaguely seen. This giant peak was the body of the Buddha. The cliff was so strong. Jun Mo's iron sword had cut a piece of the cliff. And now, the eldest senior brother was going to leave with this cliff plateau. Seeing this, the monks of the Xiankong temple were shocked and speechless. They forgot what they were supposed to do. The eldest senior brother put the wooden stick into his waist and grabbed Jun Mo's sleeve. Then they disappeared. A piece of the cliff plateau was also missing. The gap of the cliff was extremely smooth. The green pear tree was also gone. The eldest senior brother and Jun Mo left just like that. They took away the chessboard left by the Buddha, the pear tree left by the Buddha, and even a piece of flesh from the Buddha's palm. The chief monk was silent with a pale face. The drunkard took a sip of wine and sighed, Lunatics. From the old to the young, they are all lunatics. The eldest senior brother sent Jun Mo back to the underground field and then returned to the academy. From this day on, there was a pear tree in the back mountain of the academy. There was a chessboard under the pear tree. Many people were watching the chessboard. They were so engrossed in it that they even forgot the passage of time. They didn't want to see the Buddha or the living beings in the chessboard. They just wanted to see how to open the chessboard and save the youngest brother from it. If I can study at the back of the mountain of the academy, I think it will be a very happy thing. It's really cool. 4 chapters have been completed. Today's update will definitely be very late, so I want to report to everyone in advance. I won't release separate chapters. First, I'm tired. Second, I have something to do in the afternoon and evening. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 966. The back mountain of the academy, especially near the Mirror Lake, was always like spring all year round. Moreover, the pear tree was unusual, so it didn't feel bleak at all. It was full of green leaves, casting a shade. They sat in the shade and stared at the chessboard for a long time. They still couldn't figure out what was so special about the chessboard, nor could they figure out a way to open it. Muyu used an embroidery needle to tidy up her hair and said angrily, "You still haven't figured out a way?" Fourth brother looked at the chessboard and said seriously, "I've thought of 73 ways. But since eldest brother and second brother can't open it, those methods won't work." Muyu said, "We have to try." They left the pear tree and came to the water drawing room by the stream. They saw fourth brother put the chessboard on the stove and let it be burned by the blue flame. Their expressions changed slightly. Beigong Weiyang held the zither and asked worriedly, "Even if the Buddha's chessboard won't be burned, will youngest brother be roasted in it?" Shiman Buhua pointed at the chessboard on the stove with his bamboo flute and said, "It's been burning for a long time, but it's still not black. This chessboard is not a barbecue plate, and youngest brother is not pork." Fourth brother didn't pay attention to them. After confirming that the chessboard had been burned to a very high temperature, he picked it up with iron tongs and threw it into the cold stream behind the blacksmith's room. There was a sizzling sound, and white mist appeared in the stream. The big white goose, who was squatting on the top of the water wheel and looking into the distance, was startled. It flapped its wings and flew to the stream. It was very dissatisfied with these people. Heat expansion and cold contraction was the best way to destroy a hard object. However, to the disappointment of the academy, the chessboard didn't change at all. Not even a crack appeared on it. In the following days, the people of the academy did many things to the chessboard. Muyu threw the chessboard into the tactical array of the Cloud Gate, trying to tear it apart, but to no avail. Wang Qi boiled a pot of the most poisonous and corrosive soup in the world, threw the chessboard into it, and cooked it for 3 days and 3 nights. In the end, most of the fish in the stream died, and the big white goose was so angry that it was sad, but the chessboard did not move. Fourth brother took out the small iron pot left by Ning Kei in the back mountain and tried to blow up the chessboard, but only killed half of the fish in the Mirror Lake. The big white goose was so sad that he did not want to live, but the chessboard was still there. One day, fifth senior brother Song Qian suddenly said, speaking of the chessboard, "I always feel that since it's used to play chess, it must be related to chess." He and his eighth brother were the best chess players in the world. When it came to playing chess, or the chessboard, there was no one more familiar with it than them. Everyone's eyes lit up and they looked at him with hope. Muyu asked, "Then?" Song Qian touched his head and said, "Then, there's no then." Hearing this, everyone was angry. They thought that since he could not reason with them, why did he suddenly speak? Wang Qi was dealing with the pot of poisonous medicine, so he did not fully understand the situation. He took out 2 boxes of chess pieces from his yard and asked, "Then, where should we play the chess pieces?" They wanted to teach Wang Qi a lesson, but thinking that their youngest brother was in the chessboard, Chen Pipi was in Linkong, and 11 was the youngest in the academy, they held back their anger. Fourth senior brother thought for a moment, then took the chess box from his hand, and then poured all the chess pieces in the box onto the chessboard, only to hear the crisp sound of the chess pieces echoing continuously. The chessboard was full of black and white chess pieces. Everyone surrounded the chessboard and looked at it nervously. They even forgot to breathe. However, nothing happened. From the chessboard and the pear tree back to the back of the mountain of the academy, sixth brother had not said a word. Until now, when everyone looked dejected and desperate, he stood up with a big iron hammer in his hand. He looked at them and said honestly, "We still have to smash it in the end." He looked at them and said honestly, "Let me do it." Muyu said, "Senior brothers didn't smash it in Xiankong Temple." Sixth brother said, "We have more time. We can keep smashing it." Fourth brother thought for a while and sighed, "It seems that we have no other choice." The quiet back of the mountain of the academy became noisy from that day on. There was a dull sound by the mirror lake. Sixth brother kept smashing the chessboard with the iron hammer. Although he was strong and had swung the iron hammer countless times in his life, he would eventually get tired. When he was tired, fourth brother and fifth brother would step up to replace him. Those who were obsessed with chess left their chessboards. Those who were obsessed with sand tables also left the sand tables. Those who were obsessed with arrays also left the arrays. They became hard-working blacksmiths beside Buddha's chessboard. Those who were obsessed with music didn't change. Beigong Weiyang and Shimen Buhua were too thin and weak. They tried twice but couldn't even lift the iron hammer. So they were driven aside. Looking at the scene of their fellow disciples working hard, the two of them couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. So, they sat on the side and played an impassioned song to cheer for everyone and the guy in the chessboard. Bang! 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 The iron hammer kept falling on the chessboard. The ground of the cliff plateau at the back of the mountain was shaking. The fish that survived a few days ago hid in the water grass in fear. The big white goose stared at the chessboard curiously, wondering if the silly guy was in it. The little white wolf howled at the bright moon in the night sky in the depths of the forest. It wanted to learn the majestic manner of its father, but it was disturbed by the hammering sound coming from the foot of the mountain. Only the old yellow bull was calm. He sat on the meadow and ate the grass from time to time. Countless hammers fell on the chessboard, but the chessboard didn't calm down. Mu Yu's dinner was a little late. The brothers who were blacksmiths were hungry and dissatisfied. Some of them began to miss the girl who used to cook for them. "She is Haotian. Of course she can cook better than me. You want to eat? Then get her out of the chessboard." Mu Yu was very angry. She squatted down and looked at the chessboard. She said earnestly, "Little brother, when can you come out? Remember to bring your wife with you." In front of a famous Taoist temple in Lingang, Chen Pipi was teaching thousands of followers in the square. He looked calm and his words were clear and definite. The autumn wind blew his Taoist robe and made it flutter. The chubby lad in the past did look like a messenger of Haotian Taoism. Yi Su had left the South Jin Kingdom, but the new stream that he founded in a shabby alley did not decline. Instead, it was flourishing at an unimaginable speed. Because Chen Pipi was working hard to continue his cause, and with the help of the sword Garrett, no one in the South Jin Kingdom dared to stop the preaching of the new stream. As for those stubborn Taoists and divine priests who were loyal to the divine halls of West Hill, they had already become corpses in the great swamp in the dark of night. The grand preaching and teaching was a reflection of the popularity of the new stream in the South Jin Kingdom. Among the thousands of believers, there were old and young, poor and rich people. Today, Chen Pipi was teaching the third volume of the West Hill Scriptures, which was originally abstruse and difficult to understand, and could only be explained and defined by the divine priests. But with his calm voice, it became the simplest and clearest words. The original meaning of the scriptures was not lost, but the interpretation was completely different from that of the divine halls of West Hill. After the preaching, thousands of believers bowed to Chen Pipi in front of the Taoist temple and then left. According to the requirements of the new stream, if they wanted to show their devotion to Haotian and the new stream, the first thing they had to do was to be kind to others and themselves, and live a good life. It was a simple requirement, so it was really easy for the preaching of the new stream. It seemed that it was the same for any religion at the beginning. Under the protection of several disciples of the Sword Garret and the army of the South Jin Kingdom, Chen Pipi left the Taoist temple and walked to the alley where he lived. Along the way, the believers he met all respectfully gave way to him. When he returned to the shabby room in the alley, he looked at the disciple of the blind Sword Garret who was standing by the window. He took off his Taoist robe and complained, "It's so annoying to have so many people follow me every time." Lu Yiqing turned around. The sunlight seeped in from the window and illuminated the white cloth covering his eyes. He smiled and said, "I heard that since you sent people to follow you, you have gained more respect. I don't know if it's respect or fear." Chen Pipi wiped the sweat off his body with a wet towel. His white fat was trembling, and he looked nothing like the celestial being he was in front of the Taoist temple. Lu Yiqing said, "Respect, to a large extent, comes from fear, such as the attitude toward the divine halls." After a moment of silence, Chen Pipi threw the wet towel into the basin and said, "I know what you want to say. If the divine halls really want to kill me, you can't do anything about it." Any powerful organization was most afraid of internal division or internal challengers. Yisu's new stream was undoubtedly the one that the divine halls of West Hill were most wary of. The South Jin Kingdom was under great pressure from the divine halls of West Hill to hand Chen Pipi over. Lu Bai's death naturally made the Sword Garret and the divine halls of West Hill irreconcilable enemies. Of course, the South Jin Kingdom would not hand Chen Pipi over. The problem was that the divine halls of West Hill could send people to Lincoln at any time to kill Chen Pipi. Chen Pipi's ocean of qi and mountain of snow had been sealed, and he was no longer the cultivation genius he used to be. That was why the Sword Garret was so nervous and sent so many people to protect him. As far as I know, the divine halls secretly sent a red-robed divine priest to Lincoln. He has already met the one in the imperial palace. "I'm worried that the royal family of the South Jin Kingdom will change their attitude," said Lu Yiqing. Chen Pipi looked at him and said with a smile, "You have already killed an emperor. What's the harm in killing another one?" Lu Yiqing said bitterly, "I can't kill everyone from the South Jin Kingdom." After a moment of silence, Chen Pipi said, "Or, we can leave." Lu Yiqing said, "What I want to ask is, when is the academy going to do it?" Chen Pipi walked to him and looked at the sunset outside the window. He said, "I think it should be soon." Lu Yiqing said, "Then I think the divine halls will do it soon." Chen Pipi said, "Yes, my father will definitely not miss this opportunity. Let's keep watching. We won't be disappointed in the end. There will be a surprise. I can't wait. This is the first chapter of today. I will continue to write. I'm really tired. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 967. Lu Yiqing asked when the academy would act, and he meant Qinghe Prefecture. As long as Qinghe Prefecture was conquered, the South Jin Kingdom would be united with the Tang Empire. It would be difficult for the West Hill Divine Palace to do anything. The West Hill Divine Palace's target was naturally the South Jin Kingdom. The South Jin Kingdom was powerful. Taoism would never give up the South Jin Kingdom if they wanted to defeat the Tang Empire. Moreover, the South Jin Kingdom had always been under the Divine Hall's control. Lu Yiqing was about to say something, but Tang Xiaotang came back from shopping. It was not appropriate for him to say more. He bowed to them and left with the disciples of the Sword Garret. Chen Pipi looked at the disciples of the Sword Garret disappearing in the dusk. He was silent for a long time. He knew that the South Jin Kingdom was under great pressure from the West Hill Divine Palace, especially recently. It was a secret to ordinary people that they were trapped in the chessboard by Buddha. But it was not a secret to him, who could keep in touch with the academy. Because of this sudden change, the academy had to adjust their original plan. Taoism, especially his father, would never miss such an opportunity. I've been cultivating Taoism since I was a child, and I've never had any obstacles. People in the abbey praised me as a rare genius in Taoism. Later, I got 6 A+ grades in the academy and was directly summoned to the second floor by my teacher. I became a member of the back mountain of the academy and entered the knowing destiny state without knowing it. Cultivation is never difficult for me. Chen Pipi stood in front of the window and looked in the direction of Chang'an. He continued, maybe because of this, or because I don't want to compete with my senior brother for Taoism, I don't pay much attention to cultivation and am not interested in power. But now, I have become a useless person and can no longer cultivate. I can no longer have the same or even stronger power as before. But I suddenly want power. He wanted to do something for the academy. That was why he wanted power. Tang Xiaotang walked to him and held his hand. She said, "Don't worry too much." I can't not worry. Chen Pipi's 2 most respected senior brothers, Jun Mo and Yi Su, were both doing the most difficult things. He felt anxious every time he thought of this. Tang Xiaotang said, "Fourth uncle sent a letter saying that the academy is trying to open the chessboard, but has not been able to do so. Why don't you worry about it?" Chen Pipi said, "Buddha's chessboard cannot trap Ning Quebec." Tang Xiaotang was confused and asked, "Why?" Chen Pipi said, "Because he's with Haotian." Tang Xiaotang said, "But, doesn't Buddha want to destroy Haotian?" Chen Pipi said, "Even if Buddha can really predict what will happen to Haotian after his death, he can't predict Ning Quebec. He is a variable." Tang Xiaotang trusted him very much. Since he said she didn't need to worry, she really didn't. Her expression became bright and cheerful as she said, "To celebrate, let's eat an extra bowl of rice tonight?" Chen Pipi sighed and said, "No, I still have no appetite." "What are you still worried about?" Tang Xiaotang was a little perplexed. "Since this matter is related to Haotian Taoism, it must be arranged by my father. No matter whether the Buddha's chessboard can trap Haotian and Ning Ke, I'm afraid Haotian will eventually return to the divine kingdom." Chen Pipi said, "At that time, the war in the human world will start again. Can the academy still hold on? Every time I think about this, I feel like I'm chewing wax. How can I have any appetite? I can only eat 5 bowls tonight." In a city in the kingdom of Song, Yi Su was standing in the old yard of a shabby Taoist temple. He was explaining some chapters of the West Hill scriptures to a dozen new followers. After leaving Lincoln, he traveled around the world, hoping to spread the doctrine of the new stream more widely and awaken more poor believers. In the end, he came to the kingdom of Song, the most powerful Taoism force and the most devout belief in Haotian, to preach. His light-colored robe fluttered in the damp breeze from the sea. The stains on it were obvious and gave off a faint stench. It must have been smashed by rotten eggs. Preaching in the kingdom of Song was much more difficult than in Lincoln. He had been mentally prepared when he chose this place. But he didn't expect the hostility of the people to be so direct. Several broken bricks flew over from the other side of the wall and fell to the ground, making a muffled sound and then breaking into pieces. The dozen followers were frightened and panicked. Then, the wooden door of the small Taoist temple was savagely smashed open, and dozens of people rushed in with sticks in their hands, cursing and swearing. 2 children were mixed in with the adults, watching this scene with excitement. They held bricks in their hands, eager to try. It seemed that they were the ones who threw the broken bricks earlier. Rotten eggs and chopsticks flew everywhere in the courtyard of the Taoist temple. Not long after, Yi Su's body was in a mess. Vegetable leaves hung on his body, and his hair was full of stinky egg juice. The 10 or so followers were beaten badly. Their heads were bleeding, and they begged bitterly to be let out of the Taoist temple. Yi Su was the only one left in the Taoist temple. He looked at the angry people. There was no resentment or disappointment in his eyes, nor was there any pity common to Buddhism monks. He looked calm and even smiled. His reaction made the people even angrier. Some of the men raised sticks and smashed at him. There were many people outside the small Taoist temple. Hearing the noise inside the wall, those who had nowhere to vent their anger couldn't bear it anymore. They squeezed in through the door. The Taoist temple was really small. It could only accommodate dozens of people at most. But in a moment, hundreds of people squeezed in. The scene became very chaotic. Many people were pushed to the ground, unable to stand up. People were trampled everywhere. Sounds of bones breaking and screams could be heard from time to time. Yi Su was beaten to the point that he was covered in blood. But he still stood where he was without dodging. Finally, he bent down and squatted on the ground. The men at the front didn't care about the crowd or the screams. They separated the crowd with brute force and continued to hit Yi Su with sticks. Dull sounds and sounds of bones breaking could be heard one after another. After a long time, the crowd finally calmed down. Then they realized the scene was so chaotic. Many people were seriously injured. They hurriedly helped the injured out to seek medical treatment. Suddenly, a miserable voice came from outside the Taoist temple, "My child. My child. Where are my children? Have any of you seen my 2 children?" A woman in simple clothes cried as she rushed into the Taoist temple. She searched the injured people on the ground. The people who came to cause trouble today were all neighbors. They all knew each other. They hurriedly went to help. The ground was covered in blood. She couldn't find them. The woman's face was pale. She cried so hard that she couldn't catch her breath. She sat on the ground and couldn't get up again. The people in the Taoist temple looked at each other. They thought that in the chaos earlier, even those strong men were seriously injured. Could it be that the 2 children were trampled to death? That was what they thought, but no one dared to say it in front of the woman. For a moment, the scene became extremely quiet. Some people thought angrily, if it wasn't for that person, why would everyone come to the Taoist temple? It's all your fault. You're the main culprit. An old man walked in front of Yi Su. He was so angry that his whole body was trembling. He raised the walking stick in his hand and smashed it at him. There was a muffled sound. Yi Su spat out a mouthful of blood on the ground. The old man hadn't vented his anger. He was ready to hit him again. Some young men also picked up sticks and followed. They thought that they must beat this blasphemous Taoist to death today. However, the next moment, everyone stopped what they were doing. The walking sticks and sticks in their hands could no longer smash down. They saw a scene. Yi Su let go of his hands and sat on the ground weakly. There were 2 children in his arms. The 2 children's faces were pale. They didn't know what had happened. They looked at the neighbors and uncles surrounding them with sticks. When they looked again, they realized that they were so close to Yi Su. They couldn't help but scream in fear. They subconsciously picked up the brick in their hands and smashed it at him. Yi Su's face was bleeding profusely. Even though he had been hit by the brick, it was only one more wound. He looked at the 2 children and asked with a smile, "Are you okay?" The children didn't know how to answer. No one in the Taoist temple knew how to answer. It was quiet. The old man looked a little confused. The walking stick in his hand slowly fell. Who was this person? After a moment, he came to his senses. He reached out and patted the 2 children's heads. He scolded, "Silly things. You can hit anyone?" The woman rushed over and held the 2 children in her arms. She thanked Yi Su repeatedly. The old man looked at the young men behind him and scolded, "What are you waiting for? Hurry up and call the doctor." The men were a little flustered. They asked, "Sir, the doctor is outside." The old man shouted, "Please come in. Let this gentleman have a look." This was Yi Su's current life. What he was doing was actually very similar to what Jun Mo had done in the underground field. They both wanted the people to know more things. For example, what was in the field above the cliff. For example, what wasn't in the West Hill Divine Palace. For example, what they could do and what they didn't need to do. Faith was the last hope of the unfortunate. But faith couldn't be the root of misfortune or the reason to explain misfortune. True faith should let people have the courage to change their misfortune. So first of all, people should learn to believe in themselves. Yi Su and Jun Mo used to be both proud and brilliant. They went their separate ways in front of the verdant canyon. But they finally walked the same path. This path was worth applauding. But it was certainly not a good thing for the Buddhism sect and Haotian Taoism. If human beings all chose to believe in themselves, then the power of Buddha and Haotian would naturally become weak. There was a wheelchair in front of the stone house on the cliff plateau of the West Hill Divine Palace. The Abbey Dean sat in the wheelchair. He seemed to be afraid of the cold wind on the cliff. He wrapped the blanket around himself with difficulty and said, "When Haotian returns to the Divine Kingdom, I will go and kill them. I need to eat something. The next chapter will be later. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 968. The wheelchair was not big, but it was spacious for the Abbey Dean to sit in. He was so thin that he did not take up much space even if he was wrapped in a blanket. It was just like how even the greatest person could be kept in a small box after his death. Of course, we could not deny the greatness of the person when he was alive. He looked at the gray sky quietly. The sky was dim in his eyes. He was no longer as high-spirited as he was when he entered Chang'an. He was now a candle in the wind, spending his last years. The Abbey Dean was a great man if he did not think about good and evil, morality, or the future of mankind. Even though he had become a disabled man, he still did great things in his last years. Who dared to say that it was not great to put Haotian in his plan? Long Qing answered in a low voice. After a long silence, he could not help but ask, "What if?" The Abbey Dean said, "There is no what if." He was the greatest figure in Haotian Taoism in the past 1,000 years. He was the most devout believer of Haotian, even though he was plotting against Haotian. He would never doubt Haotian's omnipotence. No one can kill Haotian, not the headmaster, not even the Buddha. Long Qing looked at the gray sky and said, "But the Buddha put Haotian in that chessboard." The Abbey Dean said, "That chessboard is the nirvana of the Buddha. Even though I saw the Buddha's nirvana, I know what it is. I know what he wants to do. But it's in vain." Long Qing said, "I don't understand." The Abbey Dean said, "Haotian knows everything and is omnipotent. Even if she thinks she doesn't know, she still knows. Even if the heavens plan cannot predict, there is still the heaven's heart. Her heaven's heart is in that chessboard. She wants to go there. Otherwise, why would she look for the Buddha in the human world?" Long Qing asked, "Why does Haotian want to find that chessboard?" The Abbey Dean said, "Because that chessboard can bring her back to the Divine Kingdom." Long Qing said, "I still don't understand." The Abbey Dean said, "Even she doesn't understand, not to mention you." Long Qing frowned slightly and said, "But teacher, you understand. Because Haotian told me." The Abbey Dean pointed to the gloomy sky and said, "It's not Haotian Taoism who wants to plot against Haotian, and it's not me who wants to kill Haotian through the Buddha's plot. It's Haotian who wants to go back." Long Qing was silent for a long time. He understood what the Abbey Dean meant. Even if Buddha killed Haotian in the chessboard, it only meant that he helped Haotian return to the purest rules. But, were these really her own thoughts? Or was it the thoughts of Haotian in the Divine Kingdom? What was her relationship with Haotian in the Divine Kingdom? Who was the real Haotian? It's all because of Haotian, the Abbé Dean said. If the Buddha is really in the chessboard, suppressing or even occupying Haotian forever, and neither killing her nor letting her out, how can she return to the Holy Kingdom? Long Qing said, the chief monk of scripture said a year ago that there is only the fate of Buddha, not the will of heaven. Hearing what he said, the Abbé Dean could not help but laugh. He laughed happily and innocently, like a child who was secretly opening presents in the treehouse. He even shed tears. Apart from Haotian himself, how could there be such a thing as eternity? She either dies in the chessboard and returns to the Divine Kingdom, or she comes out alive and returns to the Divine Kingdom. The Abbé Dean took the handkerchief from Long Qing and wiped the tears off his face. He said with a smile, who can trap heaven? How can heaven be trapped? Even if it can escape from heaven's plan, how can it escape from heaven's heart? Even if you can escape from this side of heaven, how can you escape from that side of heaven? Even Haotian can't escape from her own heart, not to mention the headmaster of academy or the Bulsh*T Buddha. How ridiculous. Long Qing still did not understand. If Haotian died in the chessboard, or she could turn into rules and return to the Divine Kingdom, why was the Abbé Dean so sure that she would return to the Divine Kingdom even if she came out alive? The Abbé Dean felt a bit cold. He raised his skinny right hand. The middle-aged priest stood behind the wheelchair and did not say a word. He pushed the wheelchair into the stone house. The Abbé Dean left some words for Long Qing and then closed his eyes tiredly to rest his mind. Tell Xiong Chumo to get ready. The morning bell and the evening drum, the spring flowers and the autumn fruits, the pickles and rice, the black crows and the brook, the Buddhist scriptures and the sky, the lake and the white tower, time and space all seemed to be flowing and yet still. Ning Ke finished reading hundreds of volumes of Buddhist scriptures and began to read the notes left by the former eminent monks. He cultivated in silence with the bell ringing. His dharma gradually deepened and his mind was as tranquil as a well. Sang Sang was still watching the sky, sometimes in the courtyard, sometimes by the lake, sometimes in the stream, and sometimes in the tranquil lake. She could never get tired of watching it. One morning, Ning Ke came to the White Tower Temple after making breakfast. As usual, he chatted with the demented monk called Monk Qingban and then went to the meditation room to read scriptures. While reading the Buddhist scriptures, he felt happy and peaceful. He felt that his Zen heart was clear. Listening to the bell ringing from the distant hall, he seemed to forget all his troubles and worries. All of a sudden, he saw a shadow on the wall. It was a shadow left on the wall by the candlelight. The shadow was sitting cross-legged and seemed to be cultivating. Only then did he realize that it was already late at night outside the window. He could not help but sigh that the Dharma was indeed marvelous. Reading Buddhist scriptures could make one forget the passage of time and the suffering. Sang Sang did not follow him to the White Tower Temple today. Thinking that she was still waiting for him at home to make dinner, Ning Ke put away the Buddhist scriptures on the table, blew out the candles, and was ready to leave. But when he crossed the threshold, he suddenly stopped. He stood in the threshold and kept silent for a long time. Beads of sweat oozed from his forehead. He wanted to turn back, but he did not dare to. He had a strong feeling that something terrible would happen if he turned back, and his beautiful life would be gone forever. He struggled for a long time and finally turned back. Because he was curious. For human beings, curiosity was the best emotion to overcome fear. Ning Ke saw the shadow on the wall again. He was not reading Buddhist scriptures at the table. The candles on the table had been extinguished, and the stars above the temple were covered by clouds. It was dark, but the shadow was still there. It was not his shadow. Then whose shadow was it? Ning Ke looked at the shadow and kept silent for a long time again. Then he walked to the wall. His footsteps were heavy, and so was his expression. He walked to the wall and observed it for a long time. He even reached out to touch it and found nothing strange about it. It was just a pure shadow that could only be seen but not touched. The shade was the shadow of the tree, the sun was the shadow, and the mountain was the shadow. Whose shadow was it? How could there be a shadow that existed alone in the world? Ning Ke thought for a while and sat cross-legged in front of the shadow. It was not until he sat cross-legged that he realized that it was his own shadow, because it was exactly the same. When he was sitting at the desk, he saw the shadow sitting cross-legged and seemed to be cultivating Buddha, but he did not notice it. He suddenly remembered that he had seen a shadow on the stone wall deep in the cliff cave of Xiankong Temple. It was the shadow of Master Lotus. Could it be that his cultivation of Buddha had reached the state of lotus? Ning Ke was a little surprised. He sat on the lotus in his sense of perception and began to cultivate Buddha. He was a little worried that the shadow would gradually fade, so he wanted to strengthen it. In just a moment, he entered the state of dhyana samadhi. However, what shocked him was that the shadow on the wall suddenly struggled. The shadow was no longer sitting cross-legged. It stood up on the wall and raised its arms to support its head, as if it was trying to support something extremely heavy. No, the shadow seemed to be trying to break the sky. The sky was too heavy for the shadow to succeed. It began to hold its head and twist its body into all kinds of strange shapes, seeming to be in extreme pain. The shadow continued to struggle like a black flame, burning on the white wall and spitting out flames. It was as if it was dancing a weird dance that made the heaven and earth dance with it. Ning Ke stared at the shadow struggling in pain. He did not know why he could feel its pain. What made him feel even colder was that he could feel a deep unwillingness and anger from the shadow's struggle. The unwillingness and anger were so desperate that the whole world was about to cry. A strong sense of bitterness rushed to his eyebrows and Ning Ke began to cry. At this moment, a bell rang in the White Tower Temple. The evening class should have ended long ago. Why was there a bell ringing in the temple? The bell was so melodious that it could clear one's heart and calm one's mind. Ning Ke gradually calmed down as he listened to the bell. The shadow on the wall also calmed down. However, it was only for a moment before the shadow struggled again. And because of the bell, it became even more crazy and violent. There was a loud buzzing sound. It was not the bell in the temple, but the sound in Ning Ke's head. He felt as if someone was holding a sharp giant axe in his head and chopping at his skull. An indescribable pain spread from his head to his body. His face was pale and his lips were trembling. He was in so much pain that he could not even make a sound. The bell in the temple stopped ringing and there was silence. The bell in Ning Ke's head continued. The giant axe was still chopping at his skull, as if it was going to split his head open. He held his head and rolled on the ground in pain. What was going on? Because of the severe pain, his clothes were soaked in sweat and he was in a trance. He did not notice that in the deepest part of his sense of perception, several pieces of consciousness became unusually bright, as if they were about to explode. His only remaining consciousness was to find the person who was waving the axe in his head. He wanted to kill that person. He wanted to get rid of this terrible pain. He climbed to the wall with difficulty and looked at the frantically struggling shadow. He pulled out the iron cutlass and chopped at it with all his strength. He knew that all this must have something to do with the shadow. He wanted to chop it to death. The iron cutlass fell on the wall. Smoke and dust rose and bricks flew everywhere. However, the shadow was still there, still in front of him. At this moment, a bell suddenly rang high up in the sky above the night temple. The bell fell into the meditation room, fell on him, and also fell on his heart. The sound of the bell was another giant axe. Someone was chopping at his head with an axe. Someone was chopping at him with an axe in the sky. He huddled in the corner, his face pale and his eyes scattered and painful, as if he would die at any moment. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 969. If there was a hole in the corner of the wall, Ning Ke would definitely crawl into it, regardless of whether it was the endless abyss or the legendary netherworld. But there wasn't, so he could only hold his head and tremble in pain. He sweated profusely and blood kept flowing from the corner of his mouth. Tears and snot flowed down his face, and his clothes were already wet. He had never experienced such terrible pain. He even felt that it was countless times more difficult to endure than when he was captured by the horse gang in the wilderness and interrogated. The axe in his head and the invisible giant axe in the sky kept falling, as if it would never stop, making him feel incomparable despair. Later, his body even began to twitch, and his eyes began to lose focus. Even the color of his lips had turned into an ominous gray. He was really no different from a dead person. After a long time, the giant axe from the sky finally stopped. Although the axe in his head was still chopping, it was slightly better. He stood up with unimaginable willpower and rushed out of the meditation room, not daring to look back at the shadow. After escaping from the White Tower Temple, he staggered forward while coughing blood all the way to the astonished eyes of the people of Chaoyang City. Finally, he walked back to the small courtyard. When he saw Sang Sang under the tree, he suddenly relaxed and could no longer resist the weakness brought by the pain. He blacked out and fainted. When he woke up, it was already dawn. Sang Sang was sitting by the bed and had fallen asleep. There was a bowl of grass ginseng porridge on the table. The porridge was still faintly steaming. It seemed that she had heated it many times last night. Ning Ke thought of those nights in the city of Wei and Chang, and many years ago. He felt a little warm. He got up and helped her to the bed and covered her with the quilt. His stomach growled and he found that his stomach was wet. He picked up the bowl of porridge and wiped his mouth. When he was about to go to the White Tower Temple as usual, his face suddenly turned pale. He remembered what happened in the meditation room last night. As soon as he thought about it, he felt a sharp pain in his head. Although no one was chopping him with an axe, the pain was still there. Sang Sang opened her eyes and quietly looked at him for a long time. Suddenly, she pointed at his head and said, "There is someone in your head. He wants to come out." Nothing could be hidden from Haotian's eyes, but she did not know what had happened to Ning Quebec. Why was there someone chopping in his head with an axe? Even if she could explain this, how could she explain the invisible giant axe falling from the sky? Ning Ke walked to the window and looked at the gray sky. He asked in a trembling voice, "Why did you strike me that day?" Sang Sang thought for a moment and said, "Maybe it's because you haven't been with me these days and often forget to cook for me, so you were struck by lightning?" "There is no thunder, only the sky," Ning Ke said. Sang Sang asked, "What's the difference?" Ning Ke's face was slightly pale. He turned to look at her and said, "Why did heaven strike me?" Sang Sang pointed to herself and said, "I am the sky, or I want to chop you." Ning Ke asked, "Are you hacking me?" Sang Sang looked at the sky outside the window and said, "Maybe it's because I can't stand you treating me like this." Thinking of the pain last night, Ning Ke shouted angrily, "I married you, but I have to be controlled by your twin brothers and sisters? Is there any justice?" Sang Sang's expression did not change, and she said, "Our reason is the justice." Ning Ke felt that this statement was somewhat unreasonable, and he did not know whether her reason made sense or not. Anyway, he decided not to go to the White Tower Temple today. Although he wanted to know what was going on with the shadow on the wall and why there was an axe in his head and the sky that wanted to chop him, he did not want to repeat the painful process last night. Human curiosity could indeed overcome the fear of the unknown, but it did not necessarily overcome the pain. That day, he stayed in the small courtyard and accompanied Sang Sang to look at the sky in a daze. Every time a temple bell rang in the distance, his face would turn a little pale because he was afraid. Sang Sang looked at his expression and said in confusion, "You were not so afraid of pain before." Ning Ke said, "I was afraid of pain before, but I had to take care of you, so I could only pretend not to be afraid." Sang Sang said, "You have to take care of me now." Ning Ke thought for a moment and said, "It makes sense. I have to figure out what is going on, or there will be problems. But let's talk about it in a few days. I am really a little scared." After all, he still underestimated human curiosity, or because he had to take care of Sang Sang, he overcame his fear. He did not wait for a long time and returned to the White Tower Temple the next day. Monk Qingban was chatting with him as usual, but he did not have the energy to pay attention to him. He went directly to the meditation room, where the wall he smashed last night had been repaired. He faced the wall and remained silent for a long time. There was no shadow on the wall. He sat back at the table and began to read the Buddhist scriptures. When dusk came, he lit the candle on the table. When he lit the candle, his hands trembled, so the flame was also a little shaky. The shadow reappeared on the wall. At first, it was a little weak because of the shaky candlelight, but it only took a very short time for it to become clear. Ning Ke stood up. It was just a simple movement, but it seemed to consume all his strength. When he walked to the wall, his steps seemed a little weak. The shadow sat cross-legged as if it was cultivating the Buddha. Ning Ke took several deep breaths and sat cross-legged facing the wall. "Who are you?" He looked at the shadow and asked. Of course, the shadow would not answer him. It was silent like a dead monk. Ning Ke stared at the shadow as if he wanted to see through it. The shadow had no eyes, so it would not look at him. Just when Ning Ke thought that the night would pass peacefully, the bell suddenly rang in the White Tower Temple. Just like the night before, the evening class had already ended, but the bell began to echo. He could not even tell whether the bell came from the hall or from his heart. Ning Ke was very nervous. He remembered that something strange happened and the bell rang last night. It was the same tonight. The bell seemed to be the signal of the beginning of a catastrophe. The bell, which had a strong effect of calming the mind, made the shadow on the wall crazy. The shadow no longer sat cross-legged. It stood up and began to wave its arms to the sky. It was not calling someone, but it seemed to be cursing somewhere in the sky. The shadow turned into a black flame and kept dancing, as if it was going to burn everything. It was like a prisoner on the stake in pain. Its body was burned and scorched by the flame, which looked extremely horrible. Ning Ke felt a little sad and began to cry. He felt the shadow's unwillingness, despair and anger, and the seemingly endless desolation and sadness. He seemed to see an old monk standing in front of a tomb, cursing the heaven and the earth, slandering Taoism and Buddha, and wanting to tear the world apart. Ning Ke cried not only because he felt these emotions, but also because he knew that he would soon start to suffer the same pain as the night before. There was a loud buzzing sound. Ning Ke felt that someone was standing in his sense of perception, holding a sharp giant axe and chopping at his skull. It seemed that the person was going to break his head and jump out. The severe pain spread from the top of his head to his limbs. He even felt that his skin was being pricked by countless fine needles. It was like being peeled and then sprinkled with countless handfuls of sea salt. Ning Ke's face suddenly turned pale, and his body kept trembling like a mountain that could collapse at any time. But he was prepared for tonight, so he forcibly maintained the posture of sitting cross-legged. "Lotus. What the hell are you doing?" He looked at the shadow on the wall and shouted angrily. The shadow on the wall did not answer him. It was still struggling desperately, cursing and hitting at the sky. So the axe was still chopping at his head. Ning Kai endured the pain and bit his lips tightly. His trembling and hoarse voice came out from his teeth. He looked extremely miserable. He shouted, "If you don't stop, I will kill you." The fragments of Lotus's consciousness had been lying quietly in the depths of his sense of perception for many years. When Ning Kai was in danger, it would occasionally light up and give him instructions. Although Lotus's consciousness was very strong, it was after all a remnant left after death. Ning Kai believed that with the strength of his psyche power, he could definitely suppress it. The shadow still did not pay attention to him and seemed very contemptuous. Because of the pain, Ning Kai's eyebrows kept twitching, and his clothes had long been soaked with sweat. He knew that he could no longer bear it, so he decisively mobilized his psyche power and dived into the depths of his sense of perception. Although it was a pity and he was unwilling, he still had to crush the fragments of consciousness left by Lotus. Otherwise, he might really go crazy in this kind of pain, or even directly die. But he forgot that he had two axes. As soon as he mobilized his psyche power, a thunderous bell rang in the sky above the White Tower Temple. The invisible giant axe fell from the high sky and directly chopped at his body. At this moment, he felt as if his body was split in half, and his heart was also split in half. Although he bit his lips, he could not stop an extremely miserable howl from bursting out from his lips. He fell to the ground in pain and kept vomiting blood. His body kept twisting, like a mudfish stuffed into a hot pot. Soon the ground became stained with blood. The axe from the sky and the axe from the sense of perception continued to chop at him. His eyes were glazed and he could no longer bear it, so he passed out. But even in a coma, his body still twitched from time to time. Obviously, the two axes from the sky and the head were still chopping at him. After a long time, he woke up in the meditation room. The sky outside the window was bright, and he had been in a coma for a whole night. Fortunately, the bell and the axe stopped. He wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth, struggled out of the meditation room, and came to the lake. Monk Qingban was by the lake. Seeing his pale face and the blood on his body, he was a little surprised and said blankly, "Senior brother, are you chanting or killing in the meditation room?" Ning Kai looked at the blue sky and asked, "Did you hear the bell?" Monk Qingban looked confused and said, "What bell?" Ning Kai also looked confused and said, "Why can only I hear it?" Chapter 1, to be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 970. After returning to the small courtyard, Ning Kai sat under the tree and meditated for 3 days and 3 nights. He felt that he had completely recovered. He got up and walked out. Sang Sang said, "If you can't figure it out, why suffer?" Ning Kai did not look back and said, "I have suffered so much. Of course, I have to figure it out." He came to the White Tower Temple and quietly read the Buddhist scriptures and the notes of the previous eminent monks. When dusk came, he lit the candle on the table. He was very familiar with this and did it naturally. The candle was slightly lit, and the shadow reappeared on the wall. He walked to the wall and sat down cross-legged. After thinking for a while, he took out the iron cutlass and put it on the ground beside him. At the same time, he took out a few pieces of fu paper from his sleeves and prepared to use them later. In fact, he was very clear that neither the iron cutlass nor the divine talisman would have any effect on the shadow on the wall and the 2 giant axes. Because this was not an ordinary disaster. But doing so could make him feel a little relieved. It did not take long before the bell in the White Tower Temple rang again. The monks in the temple still did not hear it. Only Ning Kai could hear it. He looked at the shadow on the wall and said, "Come on." The shadow stood up and began to roar and struggle violently. The giant axe was waved crazily in Ning Kai's mind again. Ning Kai's face suddenly turned pale, and the blue veins on his forehead appeared with the rhythm of the axe falling. He gritted his teeth and began to bleed, but he still maintained the posture of sitting cross-legged and refused to surrender. Now he was very clear that the shadow on the wall was his and Lian Sheng's. The giant axe in his head was actually a fragment of Lian Sheng's consciousness. 3 days ago, when he could not bear the pain, he wanted to use his psyche power to suppress the fragment of Lian Sheng's consciousness. But at that time, the axe fell from the sky. On the first night, although he did not understand the truth of the matter, he instinctively wanted to destroy the fragment of Lian Sheng's consciousness. It was also at that time that the bell rang in the sky. He did not have the ability to resist the 2 giant axes at the same time. He wanted to try whether he could resist the axe in his head. You keep struggling and twisting. Those who know you will know that you are suffering, but those who don't will think that you are really crazy. What do you want to do? Ning Kai looked at the shadow struggling in pain on the wall and asked with a pale face, "What do you want? Just tell me. How can I know what you want if you don't tell me?" The shadow still did not answer him. The axe was still chopping away at his head. Bean-sized beads of sweat flowed down his nose and into his mouth. It was slightly salty, but it was unknown whether it was sweat or blood. He stared at the shadow on the wall, his body trembling as he endured the increasingly terrifying pain. He clenched his fists so tightly that his nails dug deep into his palms. "What the devil do you want?" he cried in pain and anger. The shadow suddenly stopped and turned into a dark shadow. It spread out in all directions and eventually occupied the entire meditation room. Whether it was the candlelight or the starlight outside the window, they all fell on the walls and the floor in darkness. In this dark world, Ning Kai saw the stone beams suspended in the air in the belly of the devil's doctrine. He saw the wordless tablet, the mountain of white bones, and the skinny old monk in the mountain. The old monk was a Buddha, but he was also a demon. The old monk said, "If you want to cultivate the devil, you must first cultivate Buddhism." Ning Kai said, "I've been practicing Buddhism." The old monk said, "If you don't go crazy, you won't become a Buddha." Ning Kai came to his senses and remembered that he had heard these words before. Then he realized that Lotus was not answering his question, but just a wisp of thought after his death, repeating the past. The old monk's eye sockets were deep, as if there were ghost fires shining in them. His face was twisted and he seemed to be in extreme pain. He screamed, "But these are all fake. Buddha is fake. Even the devil is fake." Ning Kai woke up in a cold sweat. With a squeak, the door of the meditation room was pushed open. The shadows in the room suddenly converged and turned into a shadow sitting cross-legged on the wall. Sang Sang walked behind him and looked at the shadow quietly. She said, "He's not Lotus." Ning Kai's head was still aching. He asked absent-mindedly, "Then who is it?" Sang Sang looked at him and said, "It's you." Ning Kai asked, "Why me? What about the bell from the sky?" Sang Sang said, I don't know." She was the omniscient Haotian, but she did not know the answer to these 2 questions. In the following days, Ning Kai still went to the White Tower Temple occasionally. He asked the shadow on the wall in pain and cursed angrily, but he still did not find the answer. The most painful thing for him was that if he did not go to the White Tower Temple, the axe in his head would not hit him. But no matter where he was, the bell in the sky was still ringing. The invisible giant axe kept hitting his body and mind, as if it would not stop until it cut him into 2 pieces. No one could hear the bell falling from the sky, just like no one could hear the bell in the White Tower Temple at night. No one could see the giant axe falling from the sky, not even Sang Sang. Sometimes Ning Ke even thought that these were all illusions. But the incomparably clear pain kept reminding him that the axe really existed and that someone was really hitting him. What kind of pain was it to have the giant axe slashing at his body all the time? He couldn't bear it at all. His body became weaker and weaker, and his spirit became more and more scattered. Sometimes, he really couldn't bear it and rushed into the courtyard to curse at the sky, but he found that it was meaningless. Sang Sang spent all her time taking care of him. She wiped the sweat from his forehead, drove away the shadows of nightmares and summer flies, held his hand, and occasionally looked at the sky. 3 years passed. Ning Ke had been hit by the axe for 3 whole years. Time seemed so long and unbearable in the pain. He even thought of killing himself, but he could not bear to leave Sang Sang. One day in late autumn, Ning Ke got up from his bed and walked to the table. He reached out his trembling fingers and picked up the teacup to take a sip of tea. He used a lot of strength to keep the teacup from falling. Genuine pain would cause one's body to react instinctively. Endless pain was a great torment to one's spirit, and it was also a great harm to one's body. He pushed the door and walked out of the room. Looking at Sang Sang, who was preparing lunch in the kitchen, he said, "I have no appetite. Just eat something." Sang Sang stood up and looked at him quietly. Suddenly, she smiled. Ning Ke thought that there was something on his face. He reached out and touched it, only to find that he had lost a lot of weight. Suddenly, his expression changed slightly. He remembered that he had not felt pain for a long time. He looked up at the clear autumn sky and murmured, "Don't you want to chop anymore?" Sang Sang said, "Do you want to go out for a walk?" In the past 3 years, Ning Ke rarely left the hospital for a walk. He did not want to hold Sang Sang's hand and suddenly fall to the ground with a pale face when they walked to the weeping willow by the river. That would be very embarrassing. But, since the axe in the sky was not chopping anymore, maybe they could go out for a walk. But why did he feel a little disappointed that the axe was not chopping anymore? "Okay," he said with a smile. But because of the constant pain, he had not smiled for a long time, so his smile seemed a little stiff. Sang Sang dried her hands on the apron and asked, "Where to?" Ning Ke thought for a while and said, "Let's go to the White Tower Temple." Walking into the meditation room, Ning Ke closed the door and sat in front of the wall. Sang Sang was outside the meditation room, quietly looking at the sky. The candle had been lit, and the shadow on the wall gradually appeared. "Long time no see." Ning Ke looked at the shadow and said, "I don't know whether you are Lotus or me. But I think you won't hurt me. So what do you want to tell me?" Just like in the past 3 years, the shadow still did not speak. Ning Ke said, "No matter what is going on, I don't want to endure it anymore. While the axe in the sky has not fallen and I am still sober, I want to ask you for the last time." The shadow slowly stood up and looked up. "If you still refuse to give me an answer, then, maybe I have to die." Ning Ke smiled bitterly and said, "I really can't stand it anymore." The shadow suddenly looked at him. The shadow had no eyes, but Ning Ke knew that he was looking at him. Ning Ke stared at him and said, "If I die, you will die too." The shadow suddenly bent down and kept trembling. It seemed that he was laughing so hard that he could not stop his tears. Ning Ke was about to say something when the shadow suddenly straightened up and hit his head with his palm. The bell of the White Tower Temple rang again. The giant axe in Ning Ke's head fiercely chopped at his head. This was the heaviest blow in the past 3 years. Almost at the same time, an extremely violent sound rang in the sky. An invisible and extremely sharp giant blade came from the sky and fell on Ning Ke's body in the blink of an eye. The 2 axes met on Ning Ke's head, separated only by the top of his skull. There was a loud buzzing sound. Ning Ke felt that his body and heart were really split into two halves. The severe pain made his pupils shrink and the root of his tongue numb. He could not even bite his tongue to commit suicide. The next moment, the pain slowly disappeared like the ebbing tide. He felt as if his head had been split open. His eyes were in the gap, and he could see things. He looked at the wall and the sky at the same time. He felt that his body was completely transparent. He could see the scenes that he could not see before. He could see clearly the things that he could not see before. Was this the divine sight? Earlier, people gathered under the pear tree at the back of the mountain of the academy. Sixth brother held an iron hammer and kept hitting the chessboard. The others kept cheering for him. They kept hitting the chessboard. As long as Ning Ke did not come out, they would keep hitting it. They believed that one day the chessboard would be broken. The autumn wind blew slightly. Eldest brother came under the pear tree and everyone came forward to bow. Eldest brother took the iron hammer and said, "You take a break. Let me try it." The iron hammer fell, and smoke and dust rose. The sound was like thunder. Shiman Buhua praised, "Senior brother is indeed senior brother. The sound is so loud." Beigong Weiyang looked at the chessboard and said disappointedly, "Isn't it still not broken?" Eldest brother smiled embarrassedly and handed over the iron hammer. Chapter 2, to be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 971. Ning Ke stood up and looked a little confused. Then he spat out a mouthful of blood. With a puff, the wall was suddenly covered with blood. The gray wall of the meditation room was stained with blood. The shadow was on the wall, so was the blood. The shadow put his palms together as if he was very happy. Then he turned around and walked into the depths of the blood sea and gradually disappeared. Ning Ke looked at this scene and suddenly felt very sad. It seemed that he would never see the shadow again. The shadow disappeared and the gray wall gradually disappeared. It turned out that the wall was fake. He looked back at the candle on the table and found that the candle was also fake. He looked at the wooden door of the meditation room and found that the door was fake, and the threshold was also fake. He looked at the roof of the meditation room and looked through the beams at the gray sky. The meditation room was fake, and so was the temple. Then what about Chaocheng and Yang? What about the sky? Ning Ke pushed open the wooden door of the meditation room and walked out. At this moment, the clouds in the sky suddenly disappeared and the sun appeared. The world suddenly became extremely clear. The white tower and the clear lake were as beautiful as a painting. The sun shone on his face and he slightly squinted his eyes. The clouds in the sky floated over again and blocked the sun. Then a cold autumn rain fell and wet the picture of the white tower and the lake. Sang Sang was not outside the meditation room. She should be looking at the sky by the lake as she had done these years. Ning Ke walked to the lake calmly as if he had already been relieved. Monk Qingban was standing under the willow by the lake to avoid the rain. Looking at Ning Ke's expression, he was slightly stunned and then showed a sincere emotion on his face. He asked happily, "Senior brother, did you get it?" Ning Ke looked at the crazy monk and said, "Yes, I got it all." Monk Qingban opened his eyes wide and asked eagerly, "What did you get?" Ning Ke said, "Everything is fake." Monk Qingban was confused and repeated it subconsciously, "What is fake?" "Yes." Ning Ke stood by the lake and looked at the white tower that was constantly being washed by the autumn rain. He said, "This tower is fake, and the rain falling on it is also fake. This lake is also fake." He pointed at the lake in front of him and then continued, "The temple is fake, the city is fake, the country is fake, and the people are also fake. The blue pass in the snow is fake, and the 72 temples in the misty rain are also fake. Monk Qingban scratched his ears and cheeks anxiously. He didn't understand what Ning Ke was talking about. He suddenly thought of something and took out a steamed bun from his robe. "I am real," Monk Qingban said innocently. He took a bite of the steamed bun and chewed it hard. Then he said vaguely, "I'm eating the steamed bun, so the steamed bun must be real." Ning Ke looked at him with pity in his eyes, but he did not say anything. Monk Qingban pointed at the lake in front of him and the white tower on the other side of the lake with the steamed bun in his hand. He cried aggrievedly, "These are all here, and I can see them all. You are so unreasonable." Ning Ke looked at him in silence for a long and said, "Monk of monk." Monk Qingban looked at him blankly, not understanding what he was talking about. Ning Ke said, "In fact, you died many years ago. You are only left with a wisp of Buddha's nature. The monks in the temple said that you have innate wisdom. Of course, they are right. You were an eminent monk of the Buddhism sect in your previous life. It is a pity that you were killed as soon as you entered the human realm. Otherwise, you might have become the Vedanta of Xiankong Temple." Monk Qingban was confused and asked, "I was killed? Who would kill me? Who killed me?" Ning Ke looked at him quietly and said, "I'm the one who killed you. Your name is Daoshi. Your mother is the elder sister of the Yueluan kingdom, Quni Mati. Your father is the president of the commandment yard of the Xiankong Temple, Master Bushu. Because I once humiliated your mother, after you left the Xiankong Temple, you first became a Dharma name in the 72 temples of the Yueluan kingdom, and then went to Chang'an to find me. Then, I killed you. Later, in order to avenge you, your father, Master Bushu, wanted to suppress the daughter of Yama and kill me at the same time. He left the Xiankong Temple with the Yulan bell and set up a trap with Qi Nian, the world wayfarer of the Buddhism sect. In the end, the trap was broken by the academy. Your father died in the hands of the academy, which means he died in my hands. Later, she and I fled to Chaoyang City and were besieged in this White Tower Temple by countless believers and powerhouses of Buddhism and Taoism. Your mother, Quni Mati, was cultivating here and was taken hostage by me. I was going to let her go later, but for some reason, I killed her in the end." Ning Ke looked at Monk Qingban and said calmly, "I killed you and your family. But, why did you kill me? Why did you kill my family?" Monk Qingban didn't listen to Ning Ke's words at all. He only felt confused and scratched his head, "And my name is Qingban, not Daoshi. Are you mistaken?" Ning Ke said, "Qingban is the stone used to pave the road. Senior brother, you must be joking." Monk Qingban said with a silly smile, "I'm called Qingban because when the abbot and the abbot played mahjong all night, they finally heard a clear board. But when they heard me crying on the stone steps, their hands trembled and they threw away the second round of mahjong. That's why I'm called Qingban." Ning Ke didn't say anything more. Since he didn't believe it, why should he believe it? Monk Qingban didn't give up. He followed Ning Ke and kept asking, "How can you prove it?" Sang Sang had been sitting by the lake and looking at the sky, so she heard their conversation clearly. She looked back at Ning Ke with a slightly confused expression. Ning Ke didn't need to prove anything to Monk Qingban, but he had to prove it to her. Only by making her believe it could she really wake up and they could leave here. "Which direction is Chang'an?" he asked. Sang Sang sat by the lake and pointed to somewhere in the east. He untied the arrow box and assembled the iron bow in a very short time. Then he drew the bow and put an arrow in the distance. When the bowstring was like a full moon, he suddenly released it. A round white turbulence appeared at the end of the arrow, and the dark iron arrow disappeared on the lake. No one knew where it went. There was no response for a long time. See, I told you it was fake. Ning Ke said. Sang Sang asked, why? Ning Ke said, if Chang An is there, the academy will definitely know it if the iron arrow is shot there. Sang Sang thought for a moment and said, then? Ning Ke said, eldest brother hasn't come after such a long time, which means that there is no eldest brother in this world. So this world is naturally fake. Sang Sang was a little confused and asked, will Li Man Man come? Ning Ke said, yes. He came back then, and he will come back now. Sang Sang didn't say anything. Ning Ke pointed to the lake and the white tower in front of her and said, many years ago, before we entered the chessboard, the white tower and the lake were in Xiankong Temple. Why are they here? Sang Sang said, we left Xiankong Temple, so the white tower and the lake can naturally come back. Ning Ke's arrow and words still couldn't convince her. She hadn't woken up yet, or in other words, she didn't want to wake up. She just quietly looked at the sky reflected by the lake. Actually, I don't want to wake up either. Especially at the moment when I woke up, I was very uneasy and even scared. My body and mind were cold, and my divine sense was agitated. I even vomited a lot of blood. Ning Ke walked to her side and sat down. He gently held her hand and looked at the gray sky. He said, although this world is illusory, these years, especially the first few years, were really happy. Those days were really good. I really don't want to leave and don't want to leave. Sang Sang leaned on his shoulder and looked confused. Ning Ke gently touched the small white flower on her hair and said, you think the sky is beautiful? Sang Sang gently nodded. Ning Ke said, you think the sky is very familiar and intimate, so you want to see it? Sang Sang looked at the gray and high sky. She obviously knew the answer, but she didn't dare to say it. Ning Ke hesitated a little and said, you were born in the sky, and you grew up there. It is your home, so you feel familiar and intimate with it. You always want to go back. After hearing this, the confusion in Sang Sang's eyes gradually faded and became calm. Just like the lake in front of her that was disturbed by the autumn rain, it gradually calmed down, and the reflected sky became clear. She blinked, and the lake waves swayed, just like her eyes. The sky reflected by the lake was cut into countless pieces of light and shadow. The original appearance of the sky could no longer be found. It turned into countless stars, as if they were constantly being born and destroyed. The lake evaporated, and the white tower disappeared. Since it was in Xiankong Temple, it naturally couldn't be in front of her. Sang Sang looked at the sky. The rain clouds suddenly dispersed, revealing the clear blue sky behind. However, it was still not the sky she wanted to see. Several cracks suddenly appeared on the porcelain-like blue sky. It was as if a beautiful piece of porcelain had been thrown to the ground, and the sky had shattered just like that. She had quietly watched the sky in the small courtyard and by the lake for hundreds of years. Today, with the help of Ning Ke, she finally saw through the sky and saw the darkness and nothingness behind it. Yes, this world was fake, or it was real. But in any case, this was not her world. This was the inside of the chessboard, and this was the world of Buddha. She slowly stood up and put her hands behind her back. Monk Qingban looked at the suddenly dark sky and panicked. He grabbed Ning Ke's sleeve and said in a trembling voice, "Senior brother, what's wrong?" Ning Ke said, "We are going to leave here. You go and find a place to hide." Monk Qingban asked, "Where are you going?" Ning Ke said, "We are going outside." "Outside? Where is outside?" Monk Qingban looked at him in a daze and suddenly said sadly, "Am I really dead?" Ning Ke didn't say anything. Monk Qingban kept crying. He kept wiping his tears with his sleeve, but he couldn't wipe them clean. Ning Ke's expression suddenly became solemn. Monk Qingban wiped his tears with his sleeve, but his tears couldn't be wiped clean. He wiped his face with his sleeve, and his face was very clean. When he wiped his face with his sleeve, one of his eyebrows was gone. When he wiped again, his nose was gone. When he wiped again, his eyes were gone. He seemed to feel a little embarrassed. He covered his face with his sleeve and said honestly, "I don't want you to go." Monk Qingban rubbed himself with his sleeves until he looked like a Buddha covering his face. He said he didn't want Ning Kai and Sang Sang to go. He didn't want them to go. Chapter 3, to be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 972. In the records of Buddhist scriptures, there was a Vedanta with a handsome face, which was very similar to the Buddha. Countless believers mistook him for the Buddha and worshipped him. The Vedanta was ashamed and thought that he had wronged the common people, so he cut his face with a sharp knife and became extremely ugly. Every time he went out, he would cover his face. Every time he met a child, he would be thrown a stone, and every time he met a dog, he would be bitten or barked at. He used to be very popular, but now he was hated by the common people. However, he didn't say any evil words or show any evil face. He allowed people to humiliate and beat him without fighting back. Ning Kai didn't understand why Monk Qingban could become a real Buddha just by wiping his face with his sleeves. After a moment of silence, he said in a low voice, "You are dead. Even if you become a Buddha here, you are still dead. Since you are dead, how can you keep us here? Thinking is the will, and the will is the power. I don't want you to go, so you have to stay." Monk Qingban covered his face with his sleeves. His face had no eyes or lips, but he could still speak. His words were full of compassion and solemnity. The light of Buddha shone through his sleeves, which was extremely gorgeous. As soon as he finished speaking, his sleeves fell on Ning Kai's face with endless Buddha's power. Ning Kai had been prepared for this. With a bang, he unsheathed his iron cutlass and cut across the air. The sleeves and the iron cutlass met silently. But the autumn trees by the lake bent down because of the strong wind. With dense cracking sounds, countless trees were broken from the middle, revealing the white stubble. A monk's sleeves fluttered in the wind. The iron cutlass broke out of the sleeves and fell on the neck of Monk Qingban. The black cutlass became red and extremely hot. The vermilion bird kept screaming in the flame. Monk Qingban had no facial features, so it was difficult to show his emotions. But at this time, one could clearly see that he was shocked. He couldn't understand why Ning Kai's iron cutlass could break the Buddha's power so easily. "I killed you once in Chang'an. At that time, in the ocean of consciousness, I proved to you that there is no Buddha in my heart. Although I have been cultivating Buddhism for many years, I still can't do it." Ning Kai's cutlass cut across the neck of Monk Qingban and said, "So I can kill you again." He withdrew the cutlass, and the head of Monk Qingban fell from his shoulders like a ripe fruit. It fell on the floor and rolled to the broken tree by the lake. Monk Qingban's body was still standing. Countless golden liquid flowed in his neck and slowly evaporated into the air. Under the tree, the face of Monk Qingban reappeared. He blinked his eyes with some difficulty and remembered the scene of him reading scriptures and worshipping Buddha in the White Tower Temple countless years ago. Only then did he realize that everything was empty. He looked towards the distant east and revealed a complicated expression. There was a bit of frustration and sorrow. Then, he slowly closed his eyes and presumably would never open them again. It was not until then that Monk Qingban or Daoshi really woke up and died. On the surface of the headless body left by Monk Qingban, many cracks suddenly appeared. The cracks gradually widened, and golden liquid flowed out of it. The golden liquid melted in the wind and turned into the purest glory of Buddha. Ning Ke looked at the scene in front of him in silence. He did not notice that Sang Sang, who was sitting by the lake behind him, looked at the golden Buddha nature with a slight frown and a pale face. He was killed by Sang Sang in the West Hill Divine Palace. Then, he was resurrected by Haotian's divine power. His body was now pure and clean. In the West Hill Divine Palace, his flesh and limbs were cut off by Sang Sang. Then, he was resurrected by Haotian's divine power. It was as if he had gone through countless changes of tendons and marrow. Now, there was no dirt in his body. It was unimaginably pure. In the cliff cave of Xiankong Temple, he completed the homework assigned by Master Lotus. If he wanted to cultivate diabolism, he had to cultivate Buddhism first. Both Buddhism and diabolism originated from avoiding the sun. But there were some similarities between them. Once they were connected, he would be very powerful. According to Lotus, he could reach the divine state if he mastered diabolism. Now, he had mastered both Buddhism and diabolism. Coupled with the teachings of the headmaster of academy, his great spirit had reached the peak of knowing destiny state. He could even see the threshold. Now, he could kill people with his Zen and his cutlass. Not to mention Monk Qingban, a fake Buddha, he could even kill powerful elders of Commandment Hall of Xiankong Temple with his cutlass. Sang Sang said softly by the lake, "So that's how it is." She had seen through everything in the world. Chaoyang City was fake, the White Tower Temple was fake, the lonely tree and the black crow in the courtyard were fake, so were the vegetables in the market and the pickle jars in the kitchen. If they were all fake, then who was real? This was the world inside the chessboard. On the cliff plateau of Xiankong Temple, she took Ning Ke into the chessboard to find Buddha. But they were delayed for 1,000 years, just like when she entered the chessboard in Lank Temple. She didn't know she was a guest in the dream. When she was on that mountain, she saw the truth and also saw the fabrication. She experienced endless loneliness. There was no one to accompany her, and there was no one to talk to. Compared with that year, she was not so lonely this time because there was one more person beside her. But she knew that without that person, Buddha could not have trapped her for so many years. She stood up and looked at Ning Ke quietly. She said, "A green pear came into my dream. How many years we have wasted here is how many years you have wasted for me." Ning Ke ignored her. He was just thinking about how many years they had lived in this chessboard world. The more he thought about it, the more uneasy he felt. It was so long that even the pictures of the first years were blurred. Master Qishan said that if you enter the chessboard from the front, a year is a moment, and if you enter the chessboard from the back, a year is a moment. Which side did we enter from? How many years have passed outside? Sang Sang was about to get angry. But after listening to Ning Ke's question, she found that he did not care about her anger at all. After a moment of silence, she said, "Since I came in, how can Buddha be so free?" Ning Ke asked, "Can you roughly calculate it?" Sang Sang thought for a moment and said, "At most a few years." Ning Ke could not understand the concept of time flow even though he had reached the peak of knowing destiny state. But it was not too difficult for Haotian. It was very dangerous. Sang Sang looked at the far east and said, "I was almost lost in time. Fortunately, I still woke up." Ning Ke looked at the sky and thought about the sound of the axe. He was a little confused. Now he naturally understood that it was very dangerous to cultivate Buddhism in the White Tower Temple. He gradually became obsessed with Buddhism. If it were other cultivators, no matter how high their state was, it would be difficult for them to wake up from that peaceful and joyful world. If they could not wake up, they could not see through the chessboard world and could not return to the real world. Fortunately, he had the remaining fragments of Lotus consciousness in his sense of perception. Lotus was an eminent monk and also a blood sea mad devil. He was obsessed with Buddhism and hated Buddhism. Only such a magical existence could maintain a clear mind in the boundless Dharma of Buddhism. He used the fragments of his consciousness to form a sharp axe to hack at Meng Qi's head, trying to wake him up with pain. Then where did the axe in the sky come from? Who wanted to wake him up? Sang Sang said, "If you did not wake up, I probably would never wake up. In this case, I will cancel what you owe me. I will not punish you." Ning Ke knew what she meant. If it were not for him, she would not be so attached to the human world. She would not be so deeply tied to the secular world. How could the chessboard trap her? He smiled and did not speak. At this moment, several rays of light suddenly appeared in the dark sky. Ning Ke was slightly shocked. Last time in the Lank Temple, he had also seen these pure rays of light in the chessboard. He knew that each ray of light was the rule of the chessboard world. The rule of the world was collapsing. It was the most terrible power. He was not afraid because he had experience in dealing with such a situation. He took out the big black umbrella and said to Sang Sang, "Let's go." He used a questioning sentence instead of saying, "Let's go," directly. He was also emotionless because he was a little uneasy. He was a little worried that she still wanted to stay in the chessboard and continue to find Buddha and kill him, which seemed impossible. He was also worried that she would return to the divine kingdom after leaving the chessboard and returning to the human world. According to Sang Sang's previous behavior, she would definitely choose to stay in the chessboard world and continue to find Buddha. That powerful enemy had unknowingly trapped her for hundreds or even thousands of years. The more it was so, the more she wanted to kill Buddha. Because she was the great Haotian. Today, her behavior was somewhat unexpected. She walked to him and said calmly, "Let's go." Ning Ke was startled and handed the umbrella to her. With a soft bang, Sang Sang opened the big black umbrella, as if opening a piece of night. The night completely covered her and Ning Quebec. A moment passed, a moment passed, a moment passed, a moment passed, a day passed, a day passed. It seemed that after countless tribulations, the black umbrella was still by the lake, and Ning Ke and Sang Sang were still under the umbrella. Nothing had happened. They could not leave, and they were still in the chessboard. Ning Ke remembered the words Monk Qingban said before he died, "I don't want you to go." The world didn't want them to go. His face was slightly pale, and his hand holding Sang Sang trembled slightly. But, why was that? In the Lank Temple, they entered the chessboard, and the rule of the world chased after Sang Sang. They opened the black umbrella, and the rule of the world could no longer find them, and they disappeared. Why did they open the black umbrella today but not leave? Sang Sang looked at the dark sky and said after a moment of silence, "I can't sense the outside world." She was the rule. As long as she could communicate with the rule of the world outside the chessboard, she could return to the human world, just like she could return to Haotian's divine kingdom even if she died. The big black umbrella could make the rule of the world unable to find them, and it could also help her communicate with the rule of the outside world. If she couldn't sense it, then there were only two possibilities. The umbrella was broken, or something was wrong with her. The big black umbrella was not broken, so something was wrong with Sang Sang. Before Ning Ke could ask, she said, "I've become much weaker." She looked a little lost. Even though the headmaster had infused the power of the human world with her, even though Ning Ke had brought her into the human world, and she had been tainted by countless mortals, she still looked indifferent and extremely confident. Because she was very powerful. Even if she was weak, she was still unimaginably powerful. But now, she found that she was really weak, so weak that it was hard to imagine. She closed her eyes and began to think about the reasons. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 973. Although the sky was dark, there was light. Sang Sang held the big black umbrella. Her feet were in the light, and her body was in the dark. She closed her eyes and did not blink. She was as quiet as a god. She was thinking about a question. No matter how strong Buddha was, he could not be stronger than the headmaster of the academy or the human world. So what did he do to weaken himself so much? In her quiet thoughts, countless scenes flashed through her consciousness at high speed. They were like fleeting lights and passing shadows, but they were so clear. Hundreds of years of time began to rewind, revealing the true appearance. The peace in the small courtyard, the tea and wine, the chess and streaky pork, walking hand in hand, wandering by the lake, holding an umbrella in the alley, looking at the misty rain in the ancient temple, the snowy border, were all greed. The quarrel in the small courtyard, the sea of blood in the market, the fading figure, the angry questioning, the confrontation between life and death, the irritation, the low mood, were all anger. The rest of the images were all caused by greed and anger, or led to greed and anger, which was ignorance. Greed, anger and ignorance were the three poisons of Buddhism. The Mahayana doctrine said, greed attracts those who are not fed up with everything that is agreeable to their feelings. Anger attracts those who are angry with everything that is against their feelings. Ignorance is slow-witted and obsessed with the law of things. It is also called ignorance. The wisdom doctrine said, those who benefit from me will be greedy, and those who go against me will be angry. This knot is not born from wisdom, but from madness. So it is called ignorance. The three poisons are the root of all troubles. The Nirvana scripture said, there are no poisons more poisonous than the three poisons. Sang Sang was poisoned by greed, anger and ignorance. Only this kind of poison could make her unable to avoid it. Last time in the Lank Temple, Buddha wanted to destroy her, but she was not awake at that time. What Buddha wanted to destroy was the imprint in her body. Now that she was awake, Buddha wanted to destroy her. To destroy something, one must first weaken it. How to make Haotian weak? The method that the headmaster of the academy and Buddha came up with was actually the same, but the method used was a little different. Turning a god into a human. The headmaster of the academy used the will of the human world and tried to change or reform her. Buddha used the poison of the human world and wanted to sink her into depravity. Sang Sang and Ning Ke were each other's natal souls. Ning Ke could know what she was thinking and what she was thinking. His face turned paler and he held her hand tightly. After spending so many years in the Buddha's chessboard world, she had been deeply poisoned. Unknowingly, she had become extremely weak, so weak that she could not leave. Then, what would be waiting for her? Don't worry. Ning Ke held her in his arms and whispered, even if Buddha kills you, you can still return to Haotian's divine kingdom. Maybe one day, you will remember me and the academy. Then, he couldn't go on. If Sang Sang really used death to return, then it would be impossible. Haotian was Haotian, and there would be no more Sang Sang in the world. The Buddha did not know that the headmaster of the academy had divided Haotian into two, nor did he know that the academy had left one of Haotian in the human world. Therefore, he did not know that even if he killed Sang Sang, he could not kill Haotian. But Sang Sang would die. I don't want to die. Sang Sang said. Sang Sang doesn't want to die. Haotian, who was named Sang Sang, did not want to die. Ning Ke looked at the distant east and said, then we will not die. Sang Sang turned and walked out of the White Tower Temple. Ning Ke held the black umbrella and followed her. Outside the temple, she pointed to a woman under the eaves whose clothes were half wet by the rain and said, don't you find it strange that she has not aged after so many years? Ning Ke said, for countless years, the consciousness of those who believe in Buddhism will come to this chessboard after their death. This is the real Buddha land. They are dead, so naturally they will not age. Sang Sang said, but you have not aged either. Ning Ke thought it was true. At least hundreds of years had passed, but he had not aged or died. Sang Sang looked at the light that represented the rules in the dark sky. After a moment of observation, she said, "The rules of this world have not collapsed, so why is there no death?" Ning Ke could not explain this. Sang Sang said, "Do you know what nirvana is?" Ning Ke said, "The highest state of Buddhism is nirvana." Sang Sang said, "Nirvana is a state." "What state?" "Tranquil nirvana, unaware of life and death, cool and quiet, no annoyance, and eternal silence. It is neither born nor destroyed, neither dirty nor clean, neither increasing nor decreasing, far away from one thing, life and death, and eternal." Sang Sang said, "This is nirvana, which is to become Buddha." Ning Ke remembered that Sang Sang once mentioned the cat with the surname Shui in front of the stone statue of Buddha on Hua Mountain. He said, "If nirvana means this, no wonder even you can't predict whether Buddha is dead or alive." Sang Sang said, "The people here are the same." Ning Ke frowned and said, "You mean the people here are neither dead nor alive, so they are not dead?" Sang Sang said, "Not neither dead nor alive, but dead and alive at the same time." Ning Ke thought for a moment and said, "You are right. No one knows whether they are dead or alive before observation. They are in the superposition of the two states. No one knew whether Buddha was dead or alive, not even Haotian and the headmaster of the academy. It was because Buddha entered this state after nirvana that there was no answer before seeing him. Sang Sang said, "So there is neither life nor death here." Ning Ke said, "But we have lived here for hundreds of years, and we have observed them for a long time." Sang Sang said, "They are just appendages of the chessboard." Ning Ke said, "You mean these people in the chessboard are all extensions of Buddha's nirvana state?" The autumn rain had stopped, and the outside of the White Tower Temple gradually became lively. Pedestrians were picking up goods at the stalls, and mothers were chasing their playful children. No one noticed that the sky had become extremely dark. Sang Sang said, "You can understand it this way. So they don't even know that they are dead. They just walk with time and don't think about anything else." Ning Ke said with mixed emotions, "Is this the nirvana that Buddha mentioned?" She said, "You said that this is the Buddha land." "Yes, this is the real nirvana. If you and I don't wake up, we will eventually become a part of this world." Ning Ke looked at the pedestrians on the street and suddenly felt cold. He and Sang Sang had almost become a part of this world. At that time, they would not know whether they were alive or dead. Would it be the nirvana or the nirvana? This was the true meaning of nirvana. Heaven and Buddha could calculate. When Buddha entered nirvana, heaven could not calculate Buddha, but Buddha could calculate heaven. Buddha did not jump out of cause and effect, but he could see through cause and effect and go with the flow. Cause and effect, that was why, and it was also the principle of the academy. Because Ning Ke picked up the baby girl on the side of Hebei province, because the headmaster of the academy took Ning Ke as a disciple, because Ning Ke wanted Sang Sang to become a human, and because they loved each other, they came to this day. We finally woke up. How can Buddha kill you? Ning Ke said, "Since he has entered nirvana, he can't do anything. I'm also curious." Sang Sang handed the black umbrella to him and walked into the street with her hands behind her back. She said, "I really want to know what that monk can do to me." Her tone was calm and proud. Holding the black umbrella, Ning Ke did not dare to leave her. Looking at the light in the sky and her pale cheeks, he sighed and said, "You are so sick. Can you stop blowing?" Waking up didn't mean that she could leave. The three poisons of greed, aversion, and obsession made Sang Sang very weak. She could not solve this situation easily, so what would happen next would be very troublesome. Walking through the crowded streets, Ning Ke suddenly stopped and looked to somewhere in the far east. Monk Qingban also looked there before he died, but there was nothing there. Back in the small courtyard, Ning Kei made a sumptuous dinner. The most appetizing dish was the bowl of green and red pickled peppers and tender ginger. Of course, he did not forget Sangsang's favorite cabbage head in vinegar. The big black umbrella was propped on the table, and the dishes were placed beside the umbrella handle. He and Sangsang sat under the umbrella and lowered their heads to eat. The scene was a little weird and also a little funny. Sangsang fiddled with the rice mixed with the broth in the bowl with chopsticks and looked at the dishes on the table covered by the umbrella shadow. She said, "You know it's fake, but why do you still eat so happily?" Ning Kei was burying his head in the food. The pickled peppers made him sweat and he was very happy. Hearing this, he picked up a towel to wipe his mouth and said, "I feel it's real, so I eat happily." Sangsang looked at the big black umbrella above and frowned slightly. She said, "I don't know why I have to hold an umbrella to eat. I'm not happy." Haotian, who was omnipotent, was forced to eat with an umbrella by the light that represented rules in the dark sky. It was indeed a little sad. Don't be dissatisfied. You have to thank the umbrella for being here all the time, and you have to thank me for mending it. Ning Kei pointed to the big black umbrella and said with a smile, "It will be new for 3 years, old for 3 years, and mending for another 3 years. This black umbrella will definitely become our family heirloom in the future." With the big black umbrella around, they did not have to worry about being discovered by the light that represented rules. But how could they leave? After dinner, they began to think about this problem. They had been in the chessboard for many years, but Ning Kei and Sangsang were not in a hurry, at least on the surface. They thought they still had enough time to solve the problem. The 3 poisons of greed, aversion and obsession were indeed the poisons of all poisons. Sangsang had no way to cure them, and Ning Kei could not think of a way either. In this case, life had to go on. Last night's dinner was too sumptuous, and there were no more vegetables at home, so Ning Kei went to the market to buy vegetables. Now Sangsang naturally followed him without his request, because they only had one umbrella. When they arrived at the market, they found that their idea was wrong. With the big black umbrella, the light could not find them, but people could. Standing in front of the dewy green vegetable stall, Ning Kei was chatting with the familiar middle-aged woman, paving the way for the subsequent bargaining. The woman thought he was very cute, so she smiled. Her smile was very beautiful, dignified and compassionate, and there was a red mole between her eyebrows. Ning Kei was also smiling at the beginning, and then his smile gradually disappeared. He looked at the woman and asked seriously, "What kind of Buddha are you?" Chapter 1, the task will definitely be completed before going to bed. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 974. The auntie did not speak but just looked at him with a smile. She held a yam in her left hand and a handful of celery in her right hand. Both were vegetables and medicine. Ning Kei suddenly laughed and said, "Are you the legendary medicine Buddha?" The auntie smiled and said, "Yes." Ning Kei thought for a while and said, "The medicine Buddha can cure diseases. My wife is seriously ill. She should be poisoned. I wonder if you can take a look and write a prescription for her." The auntie looked at Sangsang and said with pity, "The poison is incurable. It's better to go back." Ning Kei pointed to the sky and said, "What if I don't go back?" The auntie said, "Death is liberation." That makes sense. Ning Kei said with a smile. Then he pulled out his iron cutlass and chopped at the auntie behind the vegetable stall. The vegetable stall was full of green vegetables with dew on the leaves, which looked very fresh. Ning Kei's iron cutlass should have easily chopped the vegetable stall into 2 halves, chopped the leaves into countless pieces, and chopped the dew into moist foam. But he didn't. Because the vegetable stall turned into a field. The green vegetables on the stall turned into lush plants. The yam in the auntie's left hand turned into a fruit branch, and the celery in her right hand turned into a Buddha bowl. The auntie turned into the real medicine Buddha. Her hair was black and plump, and her ears fell on her shoulders. She looked solemn, and countless halos and auspicious clouds surrounded her. In front of the medicine Buddha, there were thousands of colorful banners fluttering. It was these banners that blocked Ning Kei's cutlass. Ning Kei looked at the Buddha statue that was so close to him but seemed so far away. He said in shock, "It's true." The medicine Buddha smiled slightly. The red mole between her eyebrows shone brightly, illuminating the vast field around her. The colorful banners fluttered faster and faster, and the plants in the field grew taller and taller. Ning Kei and Sang Sang stood in the field. Their legs were instantly entangled by the green vines and could no longer leave. The medicine Buddha chanted the name of Buddha and slowly tilted the alms bowl in her hand. The black liquid in the alms bowl dripped onto the ground and turned into a river, rushing toward Ning Kei and Su Li. Medicine was used to cure and save people, but it could also be used to kill people. Sometimes, good medicine could become the most powerful poison. Ning Kei only felt a stuffiness in his chest when he smelled the strange fragrance in the medicine river, followed by a sharp pain. He covered his chest and coughed, as if he was going to cough out his internal organs. Sang Sang stood beside him and looked at the medicine Buddha in the distance. She frowned slightly and said, "How ridiculous." After saying this, she blinked her eyes, and the field was shattered. The lush plants were turned into pieces, and the fragrant medicine river was shaken out of the river and spread in all directions. The vegetable stall was still the same vegetable stall. Ning Kei waved the iron cutlass, and with a shrill sound of friction, the blade slashed across the ant's body, leaving a neat cut, from which a faint golden light shone. The auntie smiled at the two of them. With a cracking sound, her body was divided into 2 halves and scattered on the ground. The smooth cut was enshrouded in golden light, as if there were countless melted gold flowing. The gold melted in the wind and dispersed into golden mist, gradually drifting around the vegetable market. Some of the golden mist floated in front of Sang Sang. She frowned slightly, and her face became paler, as if she was in pain. They couldn't buy vegetables after killing all the vegetable sellers. Ning Kei returned to the small courtyard with a heavy heart, especially when he thought of the last scene, which made him feel even more uneasy. Whether it was the real medicine Buddha or the fake one, in front of him and Sang Sang, they didn't have much resistance, just like Monk Qingban turned into the masked Buddha. But the Buddha's aura after their death seemed to hurt Sang Sang. What if they met these Buddhas again in the future? They had to leave this world as soon as possible. "We have to find a way to detoxify the poison in your body," he looked at Sang Sang and said. Sang Sang's face was a little pale, and she said, "What if I can't detoxify it?" Ning Kei didn't want her to worry, so he said with a smile, "You won't die even if I can't detoxify it. Life has to go on." Sang Sang looked at his eyes quietly and said, "Life is poison." Ning Kei understood, but he didn't know how to answer. After a moment of silence, he said, "Let's go." This time he didn't ask questions, because he didn't mean to leave the chessboard world, but to leave the small courtyard or Chaoyang city. He was going to cure Sang Sang and detoxify her. Just like many years ago. They had lived in the small courtyard for many years, so they naturally had many memories and many household necessities. But Ning Kei's luggage was very simple. In addition to weapons and food, there was only a jar of pickles. Sang Sang asked, "Where are we going?" Ning Kei subconsciously looked to the far east again, but he was a little scared. He said, "To the south." Sang Sang's pale cheeks suddenly turned red, and she said, are you going to see her? Ning Ke was stunned and then understood what she was talking about. He said with a smile, there is no great river kingdom in the south of this world. Sang Sang said, but you are used to going to the south. Ning Ke was confused and asked, so? Sang Sang said, you just want to see her in your heart. Ning Ke was a little angry and said, why are you still talking about this at this time? Sang Sang was silent and found that there was indeed something wrong with her. It wasn't that there was something wrong with her attitude towards him. She was Haotian, and he was a mortal. Even if they were husband and wife, she had her reasons to treat him. The problem was that her state of mind was a little unstable. This was anger, and there was also greed. The poison in her body was getting worse. Ning Ke understood something and held her in his arms, saying, I will definitely cure you. After tying the heavy luggage behind him, Ning Ke held the big black umbrella, left the small courtyard, and walked to the city gate. Sang Sang held his hand under the umbrella, looking a little weak. If they wanted to break the Buddha's chessboard, they needed to restore Sang Sang's strength, detoxify the poison in her body, find a way to detoxify, and find a way to leave. Monk Qingban didn't want them to go, the medicine Buddha didn't want them to go, Chaoyang City didn't want them to go, and the world didn't want them to go. Naturally, they couldn't leave so easily. There was a shop at the corner of New Street, which specialized in selling lamp oil and lamps, and also sold candles. Ning Ke often bought lamp oil here and was familiar with the boss. But when he saw the boss today, his expression changed slightly. The boss was not in the shop, but on the street. The boss blocked their way. Ning Ke pulled out the iron cutlass and asked, who are you? The boss wore a hat and looked amiable. He said with a smile, guess. Looking at the dense oil lamps in the shop, Ning Ke asked with some uncertainty, Dipankara Buddha? It was indeed the Dipankara Buddha. There was no oil lamp shop owner on the street, only an old Buddha. Outside the Buddha's body, everything was a bright lamp, emitting countless rays of light. Even the ant nests in the corners of the walls were clearly illuminated, and even the dark sky seemed to be lit up. The light began to burn, and the temperature on the street began to rise. A drop of sweat appeared on the tip of Sang Sang's nose. When she was still an ordinary person, she rarely sweated because of the congenital cold. After becoming Haotian, her divine body was as cold as jade, and she didn't sweat at all. But in front of the Dipankara Buddha, she sweated. Ning Ke felt that his heart became extremely hot, as if someone had placed an oil lamp in it. The Great Spirit rose, and in an instant, he rushed to the front of the Dipankara Buddha and chopped down with his cutlass. The Dipankara Buddha dropped the lamp. The seemingly ordinary copper oil lamp seemed to be as heavy as a world, and it easily suppressed Ning Ke's iron cutlass. The ancient Buddha began to light up thousands of lamps, and the world shone brightly. In just an instant, more than 10,000 lamps were lit. Even with Ning Ke's reaction speed, he couldn't react. Just when the 16,000th lamp was lit, Sang Sang finally made a move. She stretched out her right index finger and gently pressed against the bottom of the copper oil lamp. The expression of the Dipankara Buddha changed slightly. Even the ancient Buddha couldn't compete with heaven. The copper oil lamp in the hands of the Dipankara Buddha could no longer be put down. Ning Ke shook his wrist, and the iron cutlass was placed in front of his forearm, sweeping across the neck of the Dipankara Buddha. The head of the Dipankara Buddha didn't fall, but there was a very clear cut on his neck. There was still no blood in the cut, only a very strong golden light, and then there was flowing gold slowly seeping out along the cut, wetting the robe of the ancient Buddha, and dripping to the ground. The gold-like liquid was the breath of the Buddha, which contained infinite Buddha's power and Buddha's will. It turned into a golden fog in the wind, and the light that was refracted was the Buddha's light. Ning Ke's expression changed slightly. He held Sangsang's hand and ran to the other end of the street. He was so fast that he didn't have time to look back to see whether the Dipankara Buddha was dead or alive. He just ran desperately, and didn't stop until he ran to the end of the long street. Sangsang's face was very pale, and her brows were tightly furrowed, as if she was in great pain. Looking at the drop of golden liquid on the hem of her flowery indigo dress, Ning Kei knew that he still couldn't avoid it. Next time stand behind me, and the Buddha's light won't fall on you. He pulled Sangsang in front of him, looked into her eyes, and said very seriously. Sangsang looked at the tip of her shoe, and whispered, "I'm afraid that I will get lost." Ning Kei was silent for a moment, and then he untied the heavy luggage, took out the arrow box and the brocade bag containing the fu paper, and threw away everything else, including the pickle jar. He carried her on his back, tied their bodies with a rope, and handed the big black umbrella to her. With the arrow box in one hand and the iron cutlass in the other, he walked toward the direction of the city gate. On the street, the pickle jar had cracked, giving off a fragrance that only an old jar could have. Ning Kei walked out of Chaoyang City with Sangsang on his back, and met many Buddhas along the way. The officials of the Academy of Music, holding the sound device, turned into the best sound Buddha. The storyteller in the tile alley turned into the Nanju Buddha. The Dutta in a small temple turned into the Dharma Buddha. Many people turned into Buddhas and were killed by him. Ning Kei couldn't understand why these people turned into Buddhas, why there were so many Buddhas, where did these Buddhas come from, and why did they become Buddhas? Everyone can become Buddhas. Sangsang leaned on his shoulder, and said weakly, "This is the business of the masses." Chapter 2, to be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 975. The serfs living in the underground world under the Xiankong temple only knew the round sky and the Buddha. They had no choice, so their faith was the purest. In the human world, there were many devout Buddhist believers like them. After countless generations, the believers died, and their awareness came to the chessboard of the Buddha, forming the nirvana. According to Buddhism, what kind of world could be qualified to be called the nirvana? That was the world where everyone could become Buddha. In Chaoyang City at this time, all the servants, peddlers, officials, and monks were merciful and chanting. They were Buddhas, all of them were Buddhas. Ning Kei and Sangsang wanted to know what Buddha would do to kill them after they woke up. Now they saw the answer, all living beings were doing business with all living beings. Men, women, old, and young all became Buddhas and surrounded them. They looked solemn and merciful, chanting scriptures. They did not mention killing, but the intention of all living beings was to kill Haotian and Sangsang. There was a man who had carried a load for decades and had calluses on his shoulders. He was a thick-shouldered Buddha. There was a girl who was enlightened by the rising sun. He was a Buddha who was born in the sun. There was an old man who was fishing in the river. He was a Buddha who was enlightened by the net. There was also a Buddha of fame, a Buddha of Dharma, a Buddha of light, a Buddha of various colors, a Buddha of incense, a Buddha of light, a Buddha of all righteousness, and many other Buddhas with no names. The whole city was crowded with Buddhas. One Buddha stepped on another Buddha's kasaya, and another Buddha smashed the jade flower in the Buddha's hand. The Buddhas squeezed and pushed each other toward Ning Kei and Sangsang. Looking at this shocking scene, Ning Kei seemed to go back to those years in Chaoyang City. Countless people wanted to kill Sangsang, the daughter of Yama, who was on his back. When he saw that the man who played monkey tricks also became a Buddha, and even the monkey on his shoulder became a bad-tempered fighting Buddha, he could not bear it anymore and rushed over with his iron cutlass. He had killed many Buddhas on his way out of the city. He wanted to stop for a while. Because all Buddhas had Dharma, they were not easy to kill. More importantly, He knew that these Buddhas would turn into Buddha's light after they were killed, which would make Sangsang suffer. However, if he didn't kill these Buddhas, he wouldn't be able to escape from Chaoyang City with Sangsang on his back. He could only hold the iron saber and hack at those Buddhas. It was as if someone was sweeping the floor with a bamboo broom. The black iron knife danced back and forth among the solemn-looking Buddhas. The blade cut through the necks and chests of the Buddhas. Countless Buddhas fell. The black blade was covered with golden liquid and then turned into pure light. Suvajra Buddha was dead. He fell to the ground as if he was in a deep slumber. Then, he was trampled into golden pieces by the other Buddhas. Thick Shoulders Buddha was dead. His right shoulder had been completely sliced off by the iron blade. He looked like an unfinished golden statue. Sun Rebirth Buddha was dead. A golden scar appeared on the girl's beautiful face. It looked extremely terrifying. Ning Ke waved his cutlass and moved forward. Every time the iron cutlass fell, a Buddha would die. There was no emotion on his face. No matter who was in front of him, whether it was an old man or a child, they were all cut in half. When the Buddhas were injured, they wouldn't bleed. Only golden liquid flowed out. However, the scene was still bloody. Ning Ke was extremely cold-blooded, even more cold-blooded than he was in Chaoyang City. On the night when the academy climbed the mountain, he had been so cold-blooded. No matter who stood in his way, whether they were old acquaintances or new acquaintances, relatives or friends, they were all killed by him. Because he knew they were all dead. These Buddhas were also dead. Since they were already dead, it was not a big deal to kill them again. Of course, Buddhas were Buddhas after all. Each of them had their own tools. Although Ning Ke had become very powerful and had the help of Sangsang, it was still very difficult for him to kill them. To kill all the Buddhas, he had never thought about it. Ning Ke cut off the neck of the smiling Buddha. Looking at the smiling Buddha's head on the ground, Ning Ke felt a little tired. At this moment, a Buddha's power fell from the sky and attacked his back from the right. It was a shining golden brick thrown by the Buddha from afar. If Ning Ke didn't move, the golden brick with infinite Buddha's power would fall on Sangsang. He could only dodge it hurriedly and let the brick hit the top of his right arm. There was a muffled sound. Ning Ke felt as if his soul was about to be slapped out of his body by the golden brick. He spat out a mouthful of dirty blood. Sangsang was also affected and spat out a mouthful of blood, which wet his collar. If a cultivator from the Buddhism or Taoism sect was hit by the Buddha's golden brick, his arm bones would have been broken. Fortunately, he had mastered the Great Spirit and his body was as hard as Vajra. He only felt pain. With a clang, he sheathed the iron cutlass and took the iron bow from his shoulder. He pulled the bowstring to a full moon and shot at the Buddha in the distance. There was no arrow on the bowstring. It was just an empty shot. However, in the next moment, an extremely deep crack appeared on the chest of the Sumru Buddha. Golden liquid continuously flowed out of the crack. The shape was extremely similar to a bow. Ning Ke killed the Buddha with the bowstring. Finally reaching the city gate, he was still surrounded by Buddhas. Those Buddhas shed a lot of blood and turned into countless lights, which clearly illuminated the shabby city gate of Chaoyang City. In the Buddha's light, Sangsang's face became paler and paler. The Buddha's method was to kill the heaven with the Buddha's light, which was what she was most afraid of. Ning Ke clearly felt her pain. His heart trembled and even began to hurt, but he ignored it and did not comfort her. He continued to rush toward the field outside the city gate. He held the iron bow with his left hand and pulled the bowstring with his right hand. Buzzing, 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 as if the string of a zither was broken or someone was playing cotton, the Buddhas around the city gate cracked and died. The Buddha's light seeped out from those cracks and filled the field, becoming more and more intense. Sang Sang frowned more and more, and spat out more and more blood. Sang Sang woke up with a start and looked at the dark bottom of the cave silently. Her eyes were a little dim, and no one knew what she was thinking. Ning Ke held her in his arms and asked, "What's wrong?" Sang Sang said, "I had a nightmare." Ning Ke was stunned. He forced a smile and asked, "That's new. What did you dream about?" Haotian could not dream, only mortals could. She began to dream, which meant that she began to become a real mortal. Whether it was the secular world left in her by the headmaster of academy or the three poisons of greed, anger, and obsession, they were all becoming stronger and stronger. I dreamed of a lot of Buddhas. They picked up knives and cut their faces and bodies to make themselves bleed. They squeezed the wounds hard to make the blood flow faster, but there was no expression of pain on their faces. Some Buddhas were burning firewood to make the blood evaporate faster. Some Buddhas even jumped down from the cliff. Sang Sang's face was expressionless, but there was fear in her eyes. Ning Ke's fingers became slightly cold as he thought of those scenes when he rushed out of Chaoyang City. Sang Sang was very weak now. This world full of Buddha's light was too scary for her. Hold on a little longer. He gently stroked her back. If I go on like this, I will die. There was still no expression on Sang Sang's face. In addition to fear, there was also pain in her eyes. Death meant the end, an eternal sleep. For any existence with self-consciousness, this was the most terrible thing. She had never thought that she would die, so she had never been afraid until now. Ning Ke said, "I won't let you die." Sang Sang said, "You have said this many times. There is no other meaning except to comfort yourself." Ning Ke looked into her eyes and said, "The ending of the story should not be like this. Now that we have woken up, we must be able to find a way to leave." Sang Sang said, "You said before that this is not a story in a book." Ning Ke said, "No matter what the story is, I am the hero and you are the heroine. So we should not die." Maybe, in this story, we are just supporting roles. Sang Sang looked at the dark night sky outside the cave, looked at the Buddha's light gradually spreading in the field, and listened to the sutra gradually becoming clearer. She said, "Because this is the story of Buddha." Ning Ke was silent for a long time and said, "Sleep a little longer. We can still stay for a while." Sang Sang turned to one side and continued to sleep. Ning Ke sat beside her and looked at her frowning eyebrows, aggrieved lips, and painful expression from time to time. He felt very sad and reached out to smooth her eyebrows. Sang Sang never showed a painful expression when she was awake. They left the cave in the early morning and continued to walk south according to the original plan. It did not take long before they entered the deep forest with dense vegetation. Ning Ke relaxed a little. He thought that this place was so desolate that it could not be like Chaoyang City, where there were Buddhas and Buddha's light everywhere. He was right, but not accurate enough. There were indeed not so many Buddhas in the deep forest in the south, but there were still Buddhas. The woodcutter they met on the mountain road was a Buddha. In the middle of the night, another Buddha came riding a spotted tiger. Ning Ke continued to kill Buddhas. It was very hard and he got more and more injuries. Sang Sang also became weaker and weaker. Under the torture of the three poisons, her face was as pale as snow. In order to relax, he began to sing the song of the black pig again. Sang Sang was very unhappy and wanted to pretend to be black. But her face was too pale and did not look threatening at all. She shouted angrily, "You only know how to bully me when I am weak." Ning Ke reached behind and patted her buttocks. He said, "It's the Buddha who poisoned you. It has nothing to do with me. It's true that I bully you, but I can't take advantage of you." At this moment, a wild boar covered in black mud jumped out of the forest. The wild boar looked at Ning Ke foolishly and ran away as soon as it felt the danger. Sang Sang said weakly, the crow landed on the back of the pig. The bald donkey and the academy are all evil. With a strange caw, a black crow flew over and landed somewhere in the forest. After a moment, the wild boar covered in black mud walked out of the forest dejectedly. The black crow stood on its back, flaunting its might. Sang Sang said, "We will eat pork tonight." Ning Kai said angrily, the crow landed on the back of the pig. "You are on my back. Am I a pig?" Sang Sang leaned on his shoulder and whispered, "If you are not a pig, why are you here? It's July in the blink of an eye. Please vote for Jiang Yi with your guaranteed monthly votes and recommendation votes on Monday. Thank you. I will continue to write. There is one more chapter. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 976. Ning Kai laughed. He knew what she meant and understood that she was expressing her affection. What was even better was that there was also her affection in her words, so he was very happy. They killed a wild boar by the stream and made a bonfire. The meat sizzled on the fire, and the oil gradually flowed. The aroma permeated the air. The two of them had a full meal and then rested. Ning Kai thought of what she said during the day and said, "Don't compare the academy with the Buddhism sect in the future. You can say whatever you want about the academy, but not about the Buddhism sect." Sang Sang lay on the ground that was warmed by the fire and asked, "Why?" Ning Kai said, "Is the academy so disgusting?" Sang Sang smiled and said, "Your teacher injected the power of the human world into my body, and then you took me to the world to turn me into a human being. Buddha also planted the 3 poisons of greed, obsession and anger in my body to turn me into a human being. What's the difference between the two?" Ning Kai was sharpening the iron cutlass by the stream. When he heard this, he stopped and thought for a while before saying, "The difference is that Buddha turned you into a human being to kill you." Sang Sang said, "What about the academy? Do they just want to turn me into a human being? If it weren't for you, I would be so weak. Would the people in the academy want to kill me?" Ning Kai said, "The word 'if' explains everything. There is no 'if' in the world. I have always been by your side, so the academy will naturally not want to kill you." Sang Sang asked, "Even if I kill Kaharan?" Ning Kai was silent for a while and said, "Not counting the time in the chessboard, you have been in the human world for 20 years. Only during these 20 years, you are Sang Sang." Sang Sang understood what he meant. She should not be responsible for what happened before she was born. The academy did not blame her for youngest uncle's death, but Haotian. Sang Sang asked, "What if your teacher was killed by me in the end?" Ning Kai was a little depressed and said, "Can't you say something interesting? I have said that there is no 'if' in the world. Can you not be so annoying? Don't be so boring." Sang Sang smiled and said, "Then let's say something interesting. Where are we going next?" If they could meet a Buddha in such a remote mountain, it could be imagined that danger was everywhere in the world of the chessboard. The Buddhas of all living beings were looking for them. There was no point in continuing to walk aimlessly like this. Even if they could walk to the end of the southernmost sky, they would still not be able to find a way out of the chessboard. Ning Kai asked, "If the poison in your body is removed, can you break this chessboard?" Sang Sang said, "You just said that there are no ifs in this world." Ning Kai sighed, "Don't be naughty." Sang Sang said, "If not, why would we leave Chaoyang City?" Ning Kai said, "According to the Buddhists, only by practicing Buddhism can we get rid of the 3 poisons of greed, anger and obsession." Sang Sang said, "That's a lie." Ning Kai said, "The Buddhist scriptures are not fairy tales. I think it makes sense. Sang Sang said, unless you become a real Buddha, it's hard to get rid of the 3 poisons. Ning Ke wiped the water on the blade and walked back to her. He looked at her eyes quietly and said, do you want to try to become a Buddha? In his opinion, if she could become a Buddha here, she would be able to get rid of the 3 poisons of greed, anger, and obsession in her body. Even the Buddhas of all living beings would not be able to threaten her. Sang Sang said, no. Ning Ke slightly frowned and asked, why not? Sang Sang answered with his previous answer, it's disgusting. Ning Ke felt helpless and said, being alive is more important than anything else. Just bear with it. Sang Sang said, this is the world of Buddha. I can't become a Buddha here. Ning Ke thought for a long time and said, I have to try. Some things had to be tried because there was no other choice. As the old saying in the academy went, the last choice was the best choice because it was the only choice. Sang Sang asked, what do you want to try? Ning Ke looked across the stream to the far east and said, I want to try to find Buddha. Sang Sang smiled and said, and then? Can you kill him? Ning Ke said, no, but I'm going to see him. In the morning, the two woke up by the stream. The bonfire had been burnt to ashes, but it was still warm. Ning Ke tied Sang Sang to his back and held up the big black umbrella. They continued to climb to the top of the mountain through the thick fog. But instead of continuing to the south, he turned to the east. Sang Sang opened her eyes and looked in the direction without saying anything. It was difficult to walk in the dense forest. Ning Ke used the iron cutlass to clear the way. After walking for 2 days and 1 night, they finally walked out of the mountains and came to the open grassland. He carried Sang Sang on his back and continued to move forward. It had been raining on the grassland for a few days. His feet stepped on the soft ground and left clear footprints, forming a straight line aimed at the far east. When there were more than 100 footprints on the grassland, the ground suddenly sank and the straight line became real. The soil cracked and the grass was swallowed up. It was pitch black. Heaven and earth shook uneasily. Those patrolling light in the dark sky suddenly came to the top of Ning Ke and Sang Sang. Because of the big black umbrella, the light did not fall. Those lights seemed to be suspended in the dark sky. The front of the light became brighter and brighter, and then suddenly exploded, sprinkling countless golden flowers on the ground. Ning Ke stopped and turned to the northwest. He saw some light in the dark sky, which should be the reflection of the Buddha's light on the ground. It could be imagined how many Buddhas there were. Sang Sang looked there and said, I heard their chanting. They are afraid. Buddha is afraid. Ning Ke said. Sang Sang said, Buddha is in nirvana, so he doesn't know these things. Nirvana was the superposition of life and death. It could also be simply understood as a deep sleep. Buddha didn't know that they were walking to the east, so how could he be afraid? Then it's the world that's afraid. Ning Ke looked to the far east and said, we are in the right direction. Buddha is there. Sang Sang leaned on him and scratched his ear with her fingers. She said, are you really going to find Buddha? Ning Ke said, of course, I want to see Buddha. I want to see him. Sang Sang's movement was slightly stiff. She said, if you go to see him, he will wake up. Ning Ke raised the hilt and scratched it. He said, I want him to wake up. Sang Sang said seriously, if I were not poisoned in the past, I would have gone to find him, wake him up, and then kill him. But now I can't kill him, and you can't kill him either. Ning Ke said, you are wrong about one thing. Waking up is just a description. The correct description should be that I will know whether Buddha is dead or alive when I see him. Sang Sang said, then? Ning Ke said, then the Buddha might be alive or dead. In other words, his life and death are in our hands, and we have a 50-50 chance of winning. Sang Sang said, "You are gambling with your life." Ning Ke said with a smile, "I am gambling with Buddha's life." Sang Sang said, "I am also gambling with my life." Ning Ke said, "We are all going to die. Why not? We have at least a 50% chance of winning." Sang Sang said, "I don't like gambling with my life." Ning Ke asked, "Why?" Sang Sang said, "Because Haotian doesn't play dice." Haotian was omniscient and omnipotent. Heaven could calculate everything and control everything. So of course, she was not willing to play dice, because she could not control it. Ning Ke knew that this was Sang Sang's instinct. But he also knew that she was not omniscient and omnipotent now. If they did not go to see Buddha and gamble with their lives, they would die in the end. Fortunately, she was on his back now. She could not control where he wanted to go. After walking through the grassland after the rain and the barren fields, they came to a hill. Ning Ke noticed that the light of Buddha in the sky behind him was getting brighter and brighter, which meant that the Buddhas in this world had gradually gathered and were getting closer and closer to them. He quickened his pace. After walking through the hills for 3 days, they came to a large forest. Countless redwoods towered into the clouds in front of him. The mist in the forest was like smoke, like a world of smoke. There was a faint sound of water in the distance ahead. An ordinary-looking monk walked out from behind a redwood tree. A fat rich man walked out from behind another redwood. More and more people walked out from behind the trees. All the Buddhas in this world had become Buddhas, and all the Buddhas had come here. They were so densely packed that it was impossible to count them. Many Buddhas had chased them here from Chaoyang City. Their bodies were still covered with wounds caused by Ning Ke's swords and arrows. Golden liquid kept oozing out of the wounds, which turned into Buddha's light when they met the wind. The light of Buddha instantly dispersed the mist in the forest. All the Buddhas bowed to Ning Ke and Sang Sang with their palms pressed together. Then they began to chant with great compassion. Sang Sang's face was pale. She looked at the countless Buddhas in the forest and said with disgust, "It's annoying." The golden light of Buddha permeated the forest. It was very quiet in the forest. Only the sound of chanting could be heard. Countless Buddhas looked solemn and compassionate. However, in Ning Ke's eyes, this scene was so gloomy. He did not speak. He bent the iron bow and shot an arrow. The redwood was stained with golden blood. A Buddha sat cross-legged beside it. There was a very deep wound on its chest and abdomen. The wound was slightly curved, and golden liquid flowed out of the wound and turned into the light of Buddha. The light of Buddha in the forest became brighter, and Sang Sang was in more pain. Ning Ke looked very solemn. In the process of escaping, these Buddhas resisted less and less. They no longer used any celestial devices. It even felt like they were waiting for him to kill them. When he killed a Buddha, the light of Buddha in the world became brighter, and Sang Sang was one step closer to death. He had to kill them now. Even if he made up his mind to kill them, he could not kill them all. Get out of the way. If Buddhas stand in my way, I will kill Buddhas. If people stand in my way. Ning Ke looked at the countless Buddhas in the forest and shouted. He wanted to say, if people stand in my way, I will kill Buddhas. But thinking that there was no one in this world, he said, if Buddhas stand in my way, I will still kill Buddhas. Before his voice died away, he rushed into the forest with Sang Sang on his back. The Great Spirit was suddenly raised to the peak, and he turned into a lightning-fast shadow. The brocade pouch was broken, and dozens of talismans glowed in the dense forest. The iron cutlass slashed horizontally and vertically, the vermilion bird screamed incessantly, the horrible flame swept everywhere, the iron bow clanged, and countless redwood trees that were difficult to surround collapsed. In a very short period of time, Ning Ke used all his most powerful skills. At least dozens of Buddhas fell in a pool of blood, which showed that he was extremely powerful. However, no matter how hard he killed, the chanting in the forest did not stop. There was no reaction on the faces of the Buddhas except pity. The road to the far east was still blocked. The death of dozens of Buddhas dyed the gloomy forest with extremely bright gold. The light of Buddha became unprecedentedly bright and even gave people a feeling of firmness. The light of Buddha was so strong that it forcibly broke the gaps behind the black umbrella and fell on Sang Sang. She leaned weakly on his shoulder and kept coughing up blood. Ning Kai felt extremely cold, and his hand holding the cutlass began to tremble. "You can't die." He looked at the blood dripping from his body and said with a pale face. Sang Sang could not stand it anymore. She whispered in his ear, "I want to come in." Ning Kai did not understand what she meant by this. The next moment, he felt that there was one more person in his body. Sang Sang was still on his back. Sang Sang had entered his body. The big black umbrella could not protect her anymore. She could only hope that Ning Kai could protect her. Ning Kai lowered his head and kept silent for a long time. His breath gradually calmed down and gradually matched the breathing rhythm of Sang Sang's divine body on his back until they were completely the same. He did not understand what had happened, but he knew that Sang Sang must have paid a great price. He raised his head and put the big black umbrella on his back. He looked at the countless Buddhas in the forest and said, "Now, let's fight again." The 200,000 words were completed in June. The following is a single chapter. In July, let's fight for the first place. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for it. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 977. A few nights ago, while writing, I went out to walk the dog with my wife. It was already late at night. I looked up at the sky and squinted my eyes because of the dazzling light. Although I am a person who likes to exaggerate, this is really not an exaggeration. There is a full moon in the night sky, very bright. That night, I said in the chapter that the teacher should be in a good state at this time, but I am not in a good state. Yes, I have some personal matters to deal with at home, so I am more anxious. I will return to Hubei on Wednesday or Thursday, but this will not affect me from saying the following sentence. In July, I hope to get the first place in the monthly votes list. Readers are actually very clear that I take 2 years to write a book. This pace has been maintained for a long time. 8 years have passed just like that. Coming Night was published in August 2 years ago, and it is almost 2 years now. The wind rises and the rain falls, and the night is coming. The song ends and people leave. This story of Coming Night is also coming to an end. If it is written quickly, it will probably be finished in August. If it is slow, it will be in September. In other words, July is the last complete month of Coming Night, the last full moon. I hope this July can be as bright and beautiful as a real full moon. It seems that we have to fight for the monthly votes list now, but I do not want the last full moon of Coming Night to be spent in a nervous and anxious mood, and I do not want everyone to read without a calm and joyful mood. So this month, I hope to fight for the monthly votes in a serious, lively, and joyful atmosphere. I will work hard, and I will make a great effort to guarantee at least 200,000 this month. Everyone, please accompany me to spend this month happily. What kind of rhythm is the happiest? Of course, to fight for the monthly votes and finally get the first place. This is indeed difficult, but the more difficult it is, the happier it is, right? No matter the ending, I will work hard during the process, and your happiness is the most important. The last full moon, please spend with me. Please cast your monthly votes and recommendation votes, and draw a perfect temporary end to our Jianghu in the past 2 years. Thank you, everyone. Please. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for recommendation votes and monthly votes. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 978. The forest was dark and gloomy. The Buddhas were emitting a faint golden light, like countless oil lamps. Seeing Ning Ke standing with the cutlass, the Buddhas had different reactions. Some were sad, some were angry, and some were in awe. The Buddhas sensed that Ning Ke had undergone some important changes and realized that those changes would have some impact on the Buddha's nirvana. But they didn't know what those changes were. Ning Ke didn't understand them either. He knew that Songsong's body was still on his back, but she had entered his body. He felt full of strength and fearless. The chanting sounded again in the forest. The golden light shone brightly. Countless Buddhas appeared everywhere and slowly surrounded him, leaving no way for him to leave. The Buddhas looked at him with compassion. However, from Chaoyang City until now, the Buddhas had never tried to persuade and enlighten him, nor did they have any real communication with Ning Quebec. Because Ning Ke refused to communicate with them. Any differences would have to be solved by force. It was still the same at this moment. He took a deep breath and his eyes became unusually bright. He held the cutlass tightly and slowly raised it. Then he chopped it twice casually toward the forest in front of him. 2 blades that were hundreds of miles long appeared in the gloomy forest. The wind howled, and the moss on the ground was flipped up, the weeds were lowered, and the rocks were cracked. Wherever the blade passed, nothing could maintain its original form. Those living Buddhas standing in the area of the blade were directly crushed into pieces by the blade, and the golden powder filled the air. If the Buddhas were in the clouds and overlooking the wilderness, they should be able to see a huge character that was hundreds of miles long in the forest. The character was simple and yet so brutal. Writing a divine talisman with an iron cutlass. Ning Ke wrote such a huge divine talisman that ran through the entire forest. The terrifying talisman indifferently and valiantly cut everything it came into contact with. The bark of the giant redwood trees, which couldn't be closed even if several people were to encircle it, showed clear cracks. Even the whistling wind was cut into countless pieces by the talisman and turned into a gentle breeze, blowing the golden powder into the sky. Ning Ke waved his blade twice, and at least hundreds of Buddhas died in front of the divine talisman. However, there were still many Buddhas in the forest. They looked determined and continued to walk toward him. The talisman originated from the first talisman he had mastered, 2 horizontal talisman, which was derived from the most powerful Jing talisman of Master Yensei. When it was practiced to the extreme, it could even cut the space, let alone these Buddhas. If he stayed in the talisman at this time, he did not need to worry about the arrival of those Buddhas. However, talisman Taoism had its own congenital limitations. Talisman intent could not stay in nature forever. No matter how powerful a divine talisman was, it would gradually disperse with the passage of time. What should they do then? Ning Ke had never thought of saving his life with this grand and domineering divine talisman. He said that he would fight with these Buddhas again, so he could only attack. A clear roar rose from the ground into the sky and spread into the depths of the forest. It was as if heaven and earth were excited by this proud and ruthless roar. The dark forest suddenly brightened up. With the roar, Ning Ke stomped heavily on the ground with his right foot. Deep cracks appeared on the ground within dozens of feet. He held the iron cutlass horizontally with both hands and rushed into the forest. The two sharp talisman intents that ran through the forest also began to move slowly and unstoppably toward the east as he swept forward and the iron cutlass horizontally. Talisman Taoism was essentially different from other cultivation methods. Talisman Taoism needed to explain its meaning to nature and then mobilized the qi of heaven and earth. Talisman Master's communication with nature was a request. In a sense, it was a passive behavior. Only in this way could a talisman master mobilize so much qi of heaven and earth. No talisman master could move with his talisman intent, because human beings could not have so much psyche power, and the real heaven and earth could not obey the orders of humble human beings. Ning Ke did it today, which had never happened in the history of human cultivation. The two sharp talisman intents were hundreds of miles long and ran through the whole forest. As Ning Ke moved forward with his cutlass horizontally, they turned into two invisible sharp giant cutlasses. Before the cutlass, everything in its way would be destroyed. Death's scythe was harvesting in the wheat field. How could wheat stalks escape? There were countless Buddhas in the forest. Some were tall, some were fat, and some were thin. Wherever the cutlass passed, some heads were cut off, some bodies were cut off, some skulls were cut off, and some legs were cut off. Countless Buddhas were bleeding and fell down. Golden blood flowed out of the bodies of those Buddhas and was cut into the finest pieces by the talisman intent. Then it turned into golden powder and floated in the forest. The dark world had long been bright. The Buddha's light was extremely bright. Ning Ke had suffered many injuries after fleeing for so many days. He was tired and haggard, and his face was a little pale. At this time, under the illumination of the Buddha's light, his face became even whiter. He squinted, lowered his head, and continued to rush forward with his cutlass horizontally. There was no trace of fear on his face. If he still carried Sang Sang on his back, even if he held the big black umbrella, Sang Sang would be killed by the Buddha's light. But now he only carried Sang Sang's body, and Sang Sang was in his body. There was the sound of water coming from the east of the forest. He rushed in that direction. In front of the iron cutlass, the majestic divine talisman of Di also moved forward. Countless tree barks and golden Buddha's blood splashed into the air. Countless Buddhas fell to the ground. There were no screams or whines in the forest, but only the chanting of sutras full of compassion. Those chanting would often stop abruptly, which meant that the Buddha had died under the invisible cutlass. Ning Ke kept running with his head lowered. He did not know how long he had been running until he felt that his hands holding the iron cutlass began to tremble and his breathing became rapid again. The sound of water murmuring was very quiet and gentle. A big river appeared in front of him. He rushed out of the forest with Sang Sang on his back. He looked back and saw that the forest was full of golden light. Then, starting from the far west, redwood trees fell one after another. The earth shook, and countless smoke and dust rose. Those redwood trees were all cut by the talisman. But the talisman was so sharp that the giant trees did not fall. Until one tree fell, and then all the other trees were shaken down. The redwood trees were very tall, straight into the clouds. The shortest one was hundreds of feet high. As these giant trees fell, smoke and dust filled the air and rose to the sky. In the midst of it, there was a faint cry of the goshawk. These goshawks built their nests on the top of the redwood trees. Now they could only fly to other places. The forest with a radius of hundreds of miles was just flattened. Countless giant trees stacked together, smashing the wet ground into a mess. As for the Buddhas in the forest, they were not lucky enough to survive. 3,333 Buddhas died in the forest. Thank you, everyone. This chapter is 2,000 words. Please continue to write. Please vote enthusiastically and let us sit in the first place. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. You're tuning into the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.